She was the daughter of the saintess, yet from the moment she was born, she was her mother's punching bag. She was her mother's scapegoat. Being stripped naked and thrown out into sub-zero temperatures was a common occurrence. Ever since her daughter's birth, the saintess's powers had begun to wane. She believed her daughter was the cause and wished her dead. Even after discovering that her daughter had nothing to do with her diminishing powers, the saintess continued to relish tormenting her. Anyone who displeased her, she would kill without hesitation. Then, she would announce to the world that it was her daughter, Letitia, not yet 18, who had committed the deed. Letitia became a bloodthirsty murderer in the eyes of the world. Yet, the venomous saintess was still not satisfied. At her son's suggestion, she ordered Letitia to marry the crown prince of the enemy kingdom. With barely concealed malice, she had murdered the crown prince's family and people. Letitia, upon marrying him, would likely be killed swiftly. This would give the saintess ample justification to wage war and annihilate the enemy kingdom, deriving even greater pleasure from the act. Under her decree, the wedding was hastily arranged. Before departing, Letitia received a gift from her mother, a curse that would kill her if she didn't assassinate her husband within 6 months. Though their marriage was not born of mutual affection, Letitia and the crown prince fell in love. Their happiness, however, was short-lived. The crown prince died, and Letitia was brought back by her mother. Alone and forsaken, she died. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself back before it all began, looking at the scalding burns on her wrist. Inflicted by her mother's boiling water just that morning, she realized she had truly returned. Tears of joy streamed down her face. This time, she would protect the husband she loved. A month before her rebirth, the kingdom of Xenos had received the empire's marriage decree. Everyone was opposed, for the saintess's daughter was known as a ruthless, cold-blooded demon. Dietrian understood this all too well. She was the daughter of his enemy, but he had no choice. They had lost the protection of the dragon and had no leverage to bargain. Refusing the marriage would mean certain destruction. He had to agree. Bound by the Empire's decree, he set out from Xenos with his delegation. The relentless rain seemed a deliberate act of harassment. During the journey, the knight, Bainshah, broke her leg. Young Enoch was gravely injured. They had hoped to find a physician in the capital. However, the Empire refused them entry. Dietrian was consumed by rage and frustration. He yearned to storm the gates and slaughter everyone inside. The wedding was only 2 days away, and the saintess seemed utterly unconcerned. Wasn't she afraid he would kill her daughter? The thought brought a bitter laugh to his lips. He wouldn't dare lay a finger on Letitia. To do so would condemn his people to unimaginable suffering. He could only wait, only endure. Finally, the skies cleared, and the Empire opened its gates. He thought his knights would finally receive treatment. But the saintess allowed only Dietrian to enter, claiming their illness would defile the Empire's sacred ground. Enoch, desperate, tried to reason with Dietrian, begging him to bring the sick inside. But the guards were unyielding. One more word, and they would kill every knight behind him. Even as he prostrated himself, his head banging against the ground. Even as he pleaded with the saintess's lackeys, they closed the gates, leaving them behind. Unable to enter the city, they found a physician in a nearby village. The physician, however, gave them a bottle of poison. Enoch's condition rapidly deteriorated. Everyone knew this was the wicked Letitia's doing. Her hatred for him grew. Meanwhile, Letitia was locked in her room by her mother. She frantically pounded on the door, finally seeing the light of day after 3 days. What awaited her, however, was not freedom, but a sinister plot orchestrated by her mother. The people of the Xenos delegation hate you, Letitia. Are you sure you want to come out? The more Letitia suffered, the more her mother rejoiced. Not only did she marry her daughter off to her enemy, but she also cursed her as a wedding gift. Even from miles away, whenever she felt displeased, she would activate the curse just for amusement. With the wedding fast approaching, Letitia's wicked mother planned to exploit Enoch's death. She intended to fuel the Xenos knights' hatred for Letitia, making them despise her to the core. But Dietrich was different. Even though their first meeting resulted in him being drenched in red wine, he remained gentle towards his enemy's daughter throughout. Yet, the kinder he was, the more Letitia feared him. Having never known love, how could she easily trust? Finally, while crossing the desert, her suspicion erupted. Like a madwoman, she lashed out, slashing Dietrich's face. She screamed and shouted uncontrollably. When Dietrich approached, She believed she was doomed. A sharp pain in her foot nearly made her faint. Dietrich, while comforting her, tended to the wound on her foot. Perhaps it was the gentle touch through the thin fabric that prevented her from pushing him away. Even after a lifetime, she still vividly remembered his face, etched with concern and tenderness. Fortunately, now she had a chance to change everything. Holding the script of her past life, Letitia's eyes held a newfound determination. According to the events of her previous life, Enoch was currently teetering on the brink of death. If she didn't act, he would die in 3 days. This was the catalyst for all the tragedy that followed. Donning a cloak, she slipped out unnoticed. After careful consideration, she decided to go to the abandoned storage warehouse near the detached palace to retrieve an antidote herb. Because its contents were mostly discarded items, there were no guards stationed there. She had discovered this place in her past life, but by then, Xynos had already fallen. Guided by her memories, she arrived at the warehouse and found the key hidden amongst the weeds. She opened the warehouse door, and a thick layer of dust made her cough uncontrollably. Fortunately, her efforts were rewarded. Letitia found the herb that could counteract the poison. She tasted it cautiously. The potency was still there. She considered bringing all the broken artifacts to Dietrich for repair. They were bound to be useful, but it wasn't the right time. As she prepared to leave, a brilliant light emanated from a shelf at the back, nearly blinding her. The source of the light was a small ring. Recognizing the object, Letitia froze. It was the Elixir, a sacred artifact crafted by the goddess herself to aid the Saintess. It could not only subdue magical beasts, but also protect against desert hazards and even allow the wearer to cast magic. Its divine power was limitless. There were 9 chosen individuals in the world, known as the Escapers, who could wield the goddess's power. Possessing this ring meant becoming the master of the 9 wings, just like her wicked mother, who used it for her own selfish purposes. But there was supposed to be only one ring. Yet, here was another. Noticing a crack on the ring, Letitia suspected it was a fake. She thought that if it were real, she could protect Dietrich with it. Despite her doubts, she pocketed the ring. It might be useful after all. Preoccupied with Enoch, she failed to notice the faintest of glimmers emanating from her pocket. Meanwhile, Enoch was on the verge of death. Dietrich, a mixture of grief and disbelief etched on his face, was at a loss. He had just swallowed his pride and begged the Saintess for an antidote. She had seemingly shown mercy, giving him a single herb. While touted as a cure for all poisons, it was, in fact, lethal to the young Enoch. Looking at the priest's smug face, Dietrich felt the urge to kill him on the spot. He imagined storming into the Saintess's chambers, killing her, and seizing the real antidote. But if he did that, he knew he would be torn to shreds by the Saintess's winged guardians. Berenice seethed with rage. He vowed to stay in the Empire and kill both the Saintess and Letitia. The others tried to reason with him, but to no avail. Chaos erupted. Letitia stood just outside the door, overhearing Berenice's venomous words. How could she slip in and save Enoch? After each punishment, Letitia's cruel mother forced her to wear a servant's uniform. This way, no one would notice her injuries on her return. The small child, barely more than a toddler, looked as if a strong gust of wind could knock her over. Suddenly, someone called out to her. A young man addressed her as Miss Servant, asking for directions, she vaguely recalled. Letitia was at her limit. She couldn't even see the man's face clearly. He crouched down and touched her forehead, his expression turning urgent. He took her hand, intending to take her to a physician. Letitia was terrified. If she went to a physician, the Saintess would kill her. Before she could finish her sentence, she fainted. In her sleep, she felt a cool, comforting presence tending to her. She remembered the young man who had tried to help her. She bolted upright, afraid of where she might have been taken. "Don't worry, I didn't take you to a physician," a cheerful voice reassured her. The smiling young man introduced himself as Julius. He was Dietrich's older brother. When Letitia addressed him as Your Highness, he gave an awkward laugh. It was the first time he'd been addressed that way. After all, no one here truly treated him like royalty. Letitia's small face was filled with apology. "I don't understand much about the world outside, but thank you for helping me." Her politeness reminded Julius of someone. A look of longing filled his eyes as he spoke. Letitia didn't press him further, as his next question filled her with fear. Did the Saintess do this to you? She couldn't tell him the truth. Her mother would be furious. But why was this stranger, whom she had just met, so angry? She tried to explain, her fear growing, but Julius's anger flared. You kept begging for mercy in your sleep, crying so hard you couldn't speak. Julius was outraged on her behalf. How could anyone hurt such a small child? But Letitia felt only fear and worry. What if he confronted her mother? What if her mother became enraged? She might even kill him. The more she thought about it, the more terrified she became. From then on, whenever she encountered Julius, she would panic and run. He would limp after her, declaring, "Once I help my brother claim the throne, I'll make him overthrow the empire." But every time he said this, Letitia would flee. Yet, somewhere along the way, his concern began to feel warm and reassuring. Julius wrote about the little servant girl in his letters to his brother. Two strangers, connected through the words in a brother's letters. Now, with Enoch's life hanging in the balance, Dietrich thought of the little servant girl. Perhaps she was still a servant, or perhaps she was now a priestess in the temple. He didn't know the man's name, only that he had raven black hair, just as he was about to send someone to search for him. The Empress's lackeys arrived again. They demanded to witness Enoch consume the antidote herb. The knights were furious. This was clearly a ploy to use the prince's hand to kill Enoch. Letitia, hidden outside the door, was frantic. Seeing that the main entrance was impassable, he turned and ran towards the back door. While the divine light was creating a scene, he slipped into the room unnoticed. He never thought there would be a day his mother's actions would actually help him. Looking at Enoch, who was on the verge of death, he quickly took out the herb, crushed it, and mixed it with water. He lifted Enoch's head and helped him drink. If someone discovered him at this moment, they would surely mistake him for poisoning Enoch. Fortunately, his worries were unnecessary. Enoch's complexion gradually returned to normal. Letitia wept with joy. He clasped Enoch's hands. "Don't worry. From now on, I will protect you, Xenos." And Dietrich. Enoch opened his eyes groggily and saw the scene before him. He didn't understand what this young man meant, nor the light that emerged from his pocket. Why did it travel along his arm and transform into a black bracelet? While other childhoods were filled with laughter and joy, his was filled only with the darkness his mother inflicted. At the age of 12, Letitia encountered a light that warmed him. Every time he was tormented by his mother, his older brother would care for him. But their joyful times were always short-lived. Julius had to return to his own country. Worried about Letitia, Julius wanted to take him along. "Although my duchy doesn't have much to offer as a dowry, there will be many who will cherish you." Letitia's heart stirred, but he couldn't leave. The Empress wouldn't let him go. That night, Letitia tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Julius's words during the day filled his mind with fantasies of going to Xenos, of meeting the younger brother Julius always boasted about. However, that day of reunion never came. His brother was brutally murdered by the Empress. His body hung at the city gates and then burned to ashes. She even used his ashes to threaten the duchy time and time again. Dietrich, comforting his people, relinquished the regret he felt for his brother. The day the Empire scattered his brother's ashes to the wild beasts, Dietrich didn't return home all night. When Letitia found him, he was kneeling before his brother's empty grave, repeating over and over, "I'm sorry." Remembering the past, Letitia regretted not being able to help him. Now, these people were threatening Dietrich again. If Enoch didn't eat the poisonous herb, they would destroy what remained of Julius. He wanted to storm into the reception room and slap the lackeys across their faces. Seeing Dietrich threatened, Letitia made up his mind. He would retrieve Julius's small house. Then he would return it to Dietrich. He arrived at the central temple. The greed of the priests here was still as disgusting as ever. He pushed up his sleeves, revealing the robes worn only by the temple priestesses. As expected, because of his attire, everyone he encountered treated him with respect. He lied, claiming he was there to perform a fire ritual and needed to enter the purification chamber. That was where Julius's belongings were kept. The man looked troubled. "You can't enter without a permit." Unfazed, Letitia pulled a small box of jewelry from his pocket. The man's eyes widened. He took the box and, without a word, led the way. The meager room was filled with Julius's belongings. Letitia froze. Just how many people had his mother killed? After the man left, he rummaged through the pile of refuse at a dead sprint. Finally, he found a small, black, painted house. "Your Highness, it's been a while. In this life, I will definitely send you home." He took out the mirror he'd swiped from the warehouse and placed it where the little house had been, muttering the incantation, "Dream shatter, earth dream, card crush. Whoever sees the picture crushes, whoever crushes cards." He could conjure the illusion he desired. He thought he had everything under control. Unexpectedly, the Saintess suddenly arrived. Could it be because he saved Enoch? Had the original story changed? Returning his brother was out of the question. There was only one exit. He had to hide his brother before encountering his mother. But he'd run into a dead end with nowhere to hide. He squeezed his eyes shut. Is there anyone who can help me? Suddenly, a brilliant light flashed. The little house in his hand gradually transformed into a beam of light and flowed into Letitia's pocket. Just then, his mother's voice came from behind him. "What are you doing here?" Rare, jet black hair. An abstract bracelet. He knew it was the little servant girl from 7 years ago. The one who, when he was nearly cornered by the Saintess, had saved his night. Dietrich still couldn't believe it. 7 years ago, his brother had frightened the little servant girl. She had a difficult life, even when beaten and abused by the Saintess. She remained strong. This girl he'd never met gave Dietrich immense comfort. He had sought the servant girl's help just now with only a sliver of hope. He hadn't expected anyone would actually help him in secret. Now that Enoch was alive, the Saintess was bound to find the person responsible and kill that girl, just as she had executed his brother. Thinking this, Dietrich couldn't wait any longer. He had to see the Saintess. After arriving at the Divine Palace, he learned the Saintess had gone to the Central Temple. He had a bad feeling. Meanwhile, inside the temple, Letitia was caught by her mother. The Ilisar, her mother's holy relic, was clearly on her wrist. She was about to ask why there were 2 Saintess relics when her mother's slap landed across her face. "You parasitic creature, how dare you disobey my orders and run off?" Her mother cursed and slapped her repeatedly. Letitia choked back tears as she tumbled to the ground. The Ilisar on her wrist flashed before her eyes. She quickly pulled down her sleeve. The beating didn't matter, but this absolutely couldn't be discovered. She still had to protect Dietrich. Fortunately, her mother was consumed with rage over the surviving night. How do they get the antidote? They can't even handle a simple poisoning. She roared, "Bring the person in charge to me immediately." Watching her mother gnash her teeth, Letitia feigned fear, but inwardly, she was relieved. To her mother, she was less than an insect, and her saving Enoch had indeed changed the course of events. Then, a knight announced someone wished to see the Saintess. The old witch was even more furious. She wanted to see no one. Annoying people everywhere. "Fine, bring me my whip. I need to teach my daughter a lesson and vent my anger, and send for the healing priest." Scars before the wedding wouldn't do. She yanked Letitia's hair, spewing venomous words. Hearing footsteps, she turned dismissively. "Well, did you bring the whip?" However, the sight before her stunned her. It was Dietrich. He recognized the person lying on the floor instantly. The sky blue cloak, the vine-like pattern, the rare jet black hair, and that dull black bracelet, exactly as Enoch had described. Although he couldn't see her face, he was certain it was the person he was looking for. Ever since his brother had sacrificed himself to protect him, he had lived every day consumed by guilt. He desperately wanted to ask his brother why he hadn't let him die. The person responsible for all this tragedy was not only right in front of him, but was also ruthlessly trampling on those who protected him. Yet he could do nothing. Those pitch-black eyes made the remaining fear suffocating. Ever since he killed Euryxes, that dragon kept appearing in the night. "If you dare lay a hand on my descendants again, you'll be the one hanging on the city walls next time." For a moment, looking at Dietrich, he saw the dragon's shadow. His body trembled uncontrollably. He resolved to make Letitia kill this man. But right now, the most important thing was to keep Letitia's face hidden. Otherwise, how could he continue to play the role of a good mother? She was the daughter of God, yet she was ruthlessly beaten by her own mother. He had fainted from the pain. The vicious mother didn't forget to slander him. It's because this girl bribed the doctor that the knight became so ill. She vowed to beat the maid within an inch of her life. Anyone else might have believed her, but Dietrich wasn't foolish. Under the guise of serving the saint, she stepped forward, intending to have Letitia taken away. Panicked that Letitia might be recognized and his history of abuse revealed, he quickly feigned concern for the child. He immediately ordered the guards to summon the divine healer. In this situation, he could only treat Letitia first. It had to be said, the divine healer was skilled. With a wave of his hand, the patient regained consciousness. But Dietrich still couldn't speak to him. He could only watch helplessly as his savior. was hoisted onto his shoulder and rudely carried away. He still had so many questions to ask, wanted to apologize and thank him. For now, he could only wait for the right moment. Dietrich resolved to get the little maid out of this hell. Letitia's unusual behavior today had put the false saint in a foul mood. Her grimacing face hadn't relaxed all day. Fortunately, she didn't think too much of it, assuming Letitia was just trying to avoid the marriage. After all, she had been on her knees begging to break off the engagement just 2 days prior. She really wanted to smash the girl's face in, but because of the royal marriage, she had to restrain herself. Still fuming, she sent guards to find her ninth wing, Enoch, to teach the girl a lesson. Inside a meager room, Letitia awoke on the bed. Thankfully, her brother's small house was still there. Looking at the bracelet on her wrist, she was now certain it was real. Elisir, did you hide this from me? The bracelet shimmered faintly, as if in response. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside. Noel had arrived with the Holy Knights. In her past life, Letitia had only seen him twice. The first time was at the wedding. The second was the day Noel died. On the way back to his own country, under guard, Noel had saved her and helped her escape. Even gravely wounded, he had protected her. He was supposed to be her mother's loyal lapdog. Why had he saved her? I'm sorry I realized too late. I couldn't protect you. Before Letitia could ask what he meant, a stray arrow pierced deep into Noel's back. The one who killed him was the saint's third wing, Owen, also his lover. After that, she heard that Owen had gone mad. Listening to the whispers, Letitia felt a pang of guilt. She owed him a great debt. This time, she had to repay it. As the Holy Knights opened the door, she held a knife to her throat. She wanted to speak with Noel alone, but the knights were unyielding. She had to use the royal marriage as leverage. Do you want to marry a corpse? Then she brought up her cruel mother. Noel was alarmed. In his eyes, Letitia was a sinner, stained with iniquity. Fury boiled within him. He regretted not using his divine power against her sooner. With a resounding crash, he kicked open the door, intending to show Letitia the true might of the winged. But the room was empty. He had been tricked. Immediately, he ordered his men to surround the courtyard and give chase. He seethed with frustration. He had promised Owen he would behave this time, yet here he was, making the same mistake again. Suddenly, someone called his name from behind. The moment he saw Letitia, he could scarcely believe it. The instinct bestowed upon him by the goddess had awakened. Possessing this ring, you could do as you pleased, ascend to the pinnacle of life, and command 9 devoted followers. The goddess had granted them divine power. Even if their physical bodies perished, they would be reborn endlessly. A single glance into the eyes of the saint chosen by the ring would bind them to protect their master with unwavering devotion, filling them with an overwhelming sense of happiness. But there was one exception, the ninth wing, Enol. Not only did he feel no love for the saint, he loathed her. He was a commoner, and to care for his younger brother, he resorted to thievery, constantly pursued for his crimes. Then, one day, his winged power awakened. With a flick of his finger, he could summon rain. Overnight, he transformed from a petty thief into a revered figure, worshipped as a goddess by the masses. Grateful for the goddess's favor, he vowed to dedicate his life to the saint. But the instant he looked up and met the saint's gaze, he nearly retched. In his eyes, the saint was nothing more than a hideous old hag. From that day forward, every moment felt like an eternity in hell. One day, he overheard the other winged mocking him. The saint had gifted the Xenos delegation a universal antidote. However, for the young boy within the delegation, it was a deadly poison. The saint's intentions were clear. Enol thought of his own brother. He had to do something, but the apothecary was filled with the saint's people. He couldn't worry about that now. He would blast them out of his way with his divine power. He had to get that antidote today. But Owen suddenly appeared, stopping him. Owen was the only one who knew his secret, his inability to be loyal to the saint. He had silently watched over Enol in his torment. Owen saw his intentions, warning him even as he worried for him. Enol couldn't bear it any longer. He couldn't obey the saint, let alone help her commit such a heinous act. He wanted to kill the old woman. After his outburst, he realized he had spoken too loudly. Though ashamed, he apologized to Owen. He knew that he wasn't the one suffering the most. Owen should have killed him, but instead, he had fallen in love with him. The pain of a broken oath was not something anyone could easily endure. Thankfully, the injured boy had recovered, much to Enoel's relief. Worried that Enoel wouldn't be able to control himself in front of the saint, Owen tasked him with guarding the master of the West Palace, the notoriously cruel and depraved Letitia. He would show no mercy to someone like that. Successfully completing this task would ease Owen's mind. Yet, the moment he laid eyes on Letitia, a wave of happiness washed over him, as if he were seeing his own mother. He no longer cared about her reputation as the Empire's demon, a bloodthirsty murderer. Instinct told him that this woman before him was the one he was meant to protect. All the pain the saint had inflicted upon him vanished in an instant. He dropped to one knee, taking Letitia's hand and placing it over his heart. "Lady Letitia," he declared, "Master of my soul, I have been waiting for you for so long." Letitia stared at Enoel's radiant smile, utterly bewildered. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. If it was because of the bracelet, could she obtain it from another winged? But she didn't want to see any of them. They had tormented him relentlessly throughout his life. Unsure of what to say, she remained silent. Enoel rose to his feet. "If you have any troubles," he offered, "please tell me. I will do everything in my power to help you." Letitia was deeply moved. This time, he wasn't alone. Now, all he had to do was bring his brother to the detached palace and entrust him to Dietrich. He remembered the night the kingdom fell. It was just as cold as tonight. That was also the last day his mother had placed the curse on him. Given his limited time, he just wanted to lie in bed and wait for death. Dietrich, furious that Letitia had survived despite being told to flee, discovered he was still alive. Only when Dietrich learned that Letitia wouldn't live past the next day, even if he escaped, did he understand the curse's true nature. But no matter how much Dietrich pressed him, Letitia refused to reveal how to lift the curse. How could he say the only way was for one of them to die? "If you won't tell me, I'll ask the saintess." That retreating figure was the last Letitia saw of Dietrich. He had always regretted it. Now, with 5 months left, he wouldn't let Dietrich slip away again. Suddenly, a sharp pain stabbed at his chest. He knew that agonizing feeling all too well. But why was the curse striking early? The more his daughter suffered and struggled, the more exhilarated he became. That wretched girl dared to threaten his authority. He had to accelerate the curse, make Letitia experience true agony. The venomous mother gloated, but his triumph was short-lived. The magic circle shattered. A dragon, wreathed in shadows, appeared before him. His screams echoed through the palace. He never imagined the curse would rebound on him. The intense pain made him thrash in agony. The saintess frantically sought out Owen. But the saintess was beyond reason, shoving Owen aside despite his attempts to help. She stumbled and fell, then ripped aside the curtain. The magic circle was still there. He still had a chance. His face contorted as he frantically wove hand signs. "It's all that brat's fault. I'll kill her." But the circle wasn't fully restored, and pain crippled him again. He broke down, sobbing and begging Owen to save him. Owen noticed the saintess's arm. The skin was putrefying. His healing magic was useless against it. He'd never seen such a wound. The saintess cursed the dragon in a frenzy. "Aren't you afraid of karmic retribution? Ruining everything. Just kill me. I'll make the winged ones hunt down the dragon's descendants." She turned, clutching Owen's face. "You must kill that wretched girl for me, and that disgusting dragon spawn." The mention of dragon descendants sparked a realization. The dragon appeared because Dietrich was on his land. Regret consumed him. He shouldn't have let Dietrich come to the Empire. He had to drive them away to survive. Owen couldn't believe a dragon had returned. He hadn't seen one. Even more astonishing, doubt crept into his mind about the saintess's words. The saintess's words were law, absolute truth to the winged ones. But her outburst, he'd started to call for a servant to fetch Noel to help with the healing, but stopped. He feared the saintess would take her anger out on Noel. He used to dismiss the saintess's cruelty as harmless. But now, a crack had formed in his devotion. Noel was far more important to him than the saintess. Shame gnawed at him for his disloyalty. He wrestled with his conflicting emotions, plotting against the saintess even as he felt ashamed. The wedding had to happen soon. The saintess's enemies had to leave. Meanwhile, Letitia finally regained some color. Looking at Letitia's wounded hands, Dietrich's heart ached. He hadn't stopped worrying since their parting at the central temple. Dietrich's subordinates had been searching tirelessly for the young shrine maiden. Perhaps the gods had heard his pleas, for a miracle truly occurred. He finally found her. After so long searching fruitlessly, she was here, unconscious, The maiden's body was ice cold, but thankfully, she was still alive. It seemed she had been purchasing something before collapsing. Dietrian carefully retrieved the object from the earth. It was his brother's remains. Now he understood. The shrine maiden had gone to the temple today for his brother. Holding her close, a torrent of emotions washed over him. His brother had finally returned to him, brought back by this girl. Who are you, he wondered. Why are you so kind to me? Dietrian couldn't comprehend it. Why did his heart ache so intensely when he looked at her? From a moment he first saw her in the temple, her image had been etched into his mind. His poignant reflections were interrupted by voices outside the door. He stood up, alert. There was no place to hide two people in this small space. He had three choices: hide himself, hide the girl, or kill the approaching man. Even though his betrothed was the daughter of his enemy, a woman despised by many, he would never abandon Lachesis. For the sake of his people, Dietrian had always adhered to his principles. But now, his thoughts were consumed by another woman. Ever since he recognized the young shrine maiden in the temple, his heart had been captivated by her. Even in the face of danger, just now, his first thought had been for her safety. So he chose to hide himself. If the saintess discovered them together, the consequences would be dire. After all, he was about to marry the saintess's daughter. But the two men reacted to the shrine maiden as if she were a plague. Clearly terrified, yet compelled to act, Dietrian was perplexed. He stealthily followed them to the West Palace. He'd heard that those guilty of divine transgressions were imprisoned there. It was said that long ago, Letitia had killed her nursemaid. The saintess, tearfully, had locked her daughter away in this very place. If only his bride-to-be were not Letitia, the saintess's daughter, but this shrine maiden instead. The thought shocked him. How could he entertain such a notion? Fortunately, he overheard Noel conversing with the two men. The shrine maiden's treatment was progressing well. Still, he couldn't bear to leave. Once the saintess's followers departed, he slipped in to see her. He wanted to stay until she awoke. Seeing her lying there, he was stunned. So breathtakingly beautiful, someone he desperately wanted to protect. Yet she had endured so much suffering in a single day. I will never let her be hurt again, he vowed silently. A duke wanting to protect a divinely accused shrine maiden? How ludicrous it sounded, but he wouldn't waver. Looking at the dilapidated room, the decaying furnishings, his heart ached. How long had the saintess tormented her? 7 years? Perhaps longer. I want to know your name, he whispered. Will you come with me back to the duchy? His hand reached out, drawn to her. Then he stopped abruptly. She was still unconscious. What was he doing? He quickly withdrew his hand. How could he take such liberties? He was about to marry another woman. He had only met this girl today. Yet, for her, he was constantly breaking his own principles. Even knowing the potential repercussions, he still yearned to be near her. His heart was pounding in his chest. If he couldn't control himself, then he had better leave. Before he went, he placed his brother's small urn on her bedside table. She would be distraught if she woke and couldn't find it. It was better to let her return his brother to him personally. Next time they met, he had to see the color of the little servant girl's eyes. He had to hear her voice. But unexpectedly, the next day, the high priest delivered the saint's decree. He was to hold the national wedding as soon as possible and then depart. Looking at the beaming smiles of his subordinates, Dietrich couldn't bring himself to share their joy. He had wanted to stay longer to persuade the little servant girl to return to his kingdom with him. Now, dressed in formal attire, his heart ached. He regretted not leaving the girl a note. Today was the day he was to meet his fiancée's parents before the wedding. As he sighed, Owen arrived to escort him to the divine palace. Owen mentioned that all the priests were gathered there, and Dietrich searched eagerly, filled with anticipation. But he couldn't find the little servant girl. Disappointment heavy in his heart, he arrived at the divine palace. Hearing the announcement from outside, Letitia's heart pounded with unease. The doors opened with a creak, and Dietrich entered. He offered a knightly kiss to the saint's feather. But as he took Letitia's hand, he froze. Why was her hand trembling? And why was she wearing the bracelet inlaid with black gemstones, the bracelet he had? Disregarding etiquette, Dietrich looked up. It was her, the girl he had been searching for. Sharp fingernails dug into flesh as the mother feigned concern, asking her daughter if she was hurt. This was the price for injuring his arm. And now she was making her daughter play along, feigning happiness, creating the illusion of a loving mother and daughter. But the venomous mother had miscalculated. He saw the disgust he felt for his daughter. Dietrich had already witnessed this at the temple. He had assumed the little servant girl was an ordinary priestess. He never imagined she was the saint's daughter. That's why, upon seeing the familiar bracelet, he lost his composure. He didn't recover until he heard Letitia address him as Your Highness. Finally, he snapped out of his shock. At last, he saw the color of the little servant girl's eyes. He knew her name. Even her voice was as beautiful as he'd imagined, but he still couldn't believe it. That kind, beautiful little servant girl a murderess? Letitia, though still confused, found the saint's performance of motherly love utterly ridiculous. The saint's gaze towards her daughter was clearly filled with hatred. His mind raced. His brother had encountered the little servant girl 7 years ago. That meant Letitia had been abused even before the murders. A child, terrified of her mother and too afraid to seek help. Could she really be capable of killing so many people? But what if his longing had clouded his judgment? What if he had mistaken Letitia for the little servant girl? Or perhaps this girl wasn't who he thought she was. With this thought, he decided to probe. And to probe effectively, he needed to strike a nerve. The saint is so kind to you. Your childhood must have been very happy. Unlike mine, I was often whipped by my parents. Letitia maintained a calm facade, but inside, her heart bled. Dietrich's attitude was different from her previous life. She remembered him smiling warmly at her then, greeting her enthusiastically. But from the moment he entered the reception room, his face had been a mask of gloom. Had her mother done something else to make him hate her so much? Listening to their conversation, the saint brewed a cauldron of malice. She feigned regret for Urios's death, but her words dripped with accusation. Letitia looked on in shock. Her mother was actually telling Dietrich, right to his face, that Urios got what he deserved. Forced to watch her beloved being slandered, she felt powerless. She couldn't do anything, and the frustration was suffocating. Her every reaction was carefully observed by Dietrich, who was starting to feel certain. He wanted to be absolutely sure. Echoing the saint's words, he said his brother deserved his fate. Though he felt regret for his brother's death, this outcome was ultimately beneficial for the kingdom. In other words, his brother deserved to die. Hearing these words, Letitia's expression shifted, revealing a flicker of something unreadable. In that moment, he knew he hadn't misjudged anyone. Letitia was the little servant girl. Only now did he understand. He finally realized why the saintess had been so harsh to his delegation, knowing her daughter was to marry him. He had assumed it was mere arrogance and a penchant for theatrics. But the truth was far more sinister. The saintess wanted Letitia to suffer a lifetime of resentment and bitterness. The rumors surrounding Letitia now seemed utterly baseless. Before leaving, he took Letitia's hand once more, bestowing upon her his knight's mark, anticipating their next encounter. Yet, faintly, he seemed to detect the scent of blood clinging to Letitia. No sooner had he departed than the saintess flew into a rage. To test whether Deuterion knew of the dragon's existence, she had deliberately arranged this meeting, but it yielded nothing. However, Deuterion's respect for Letitia proved her performance as a loving mother hadn't been in vain. She glared at her own withered hand, a consequence of the curse's backlash. I'm the cursed one. Why am I the one suffering? The more she looked at Letitia, the angrier she became. She roared for Noelle, pointing in Letitia's direction. That wretched girl ruined everything. Noelle, teach her a lesson for me. A mere shift in mood, and this venomous mother was ready to unleash her wrath upon her daughter. But she had mistakenly called upon the 9th Noelle, the Noelle who shared no emotional connection with her. But this time was different. This Noelle could sense his master bleeding. He turned a fierce gaze upon the saintess. The water in the room suddenly began to boil and surge upwards. She hurt you, master. Wring her neck. The voice echoed in Noelle's mind. The servants, terrified, froze in place. The saintess, oblivious to the danger, continued to goad Noelle. Show that girl your divine power. At the critical moment, Letitia stopped Noelle. The time was not yet right. Only patience would keep them from danger. Noelle seethed with frustration. He longed to avenge his master, but he could not disobey her wishes. The water receded, and calm returned to the room. He approached the saintess and kissed the old woman's hand. Oh, master of my soul, I will obey your command. I will make that girl wish she were dead. Venom laced his words, but anguish tore at his heart. The saintess wondered at his sudden coldness. His gaze was resolute. As your wing, I must be loyal to my master. Please grant me this opportunity. I want to sever Letitia's hand right now. The Saintess was pleased. She had considered revoking Noel's position as a wing, but now saw no need. However, she couldn't grant Noel's request. The wedding was scheduled for the day after tomorrow, after all. Upon returning to the West Palace, Noel healed Letitia's injuries. He felt terrible for what he had almost done to his master. Tears welled in his eyes as he vowed to kill the Saintess. He finally understood the depth of Owen's affection for the Saintess. He had overcome his very instincts to protect her. If only Owen would accept you as his master, he blurted out. Letitia, however, was worried. She didn't want to cause another separation between the 39 pair. Noel grew even more agitated. He had tested Owen before, but Owen had declared there could never be another Saintess. How could the man he admired have such poor judgment? He lay down on Letitia's lap, like a child, pleading for her to take him away. Life in the Divine Palace was agonizing. He didn't know what he would do without Owen. He abruptly sat up. If he stayed here, he would lose control again, just like before. But what about Owen if you leave? His master's words gave him pause. Letitia wanted them to be happy. She didn't want a repeat of the tragedy from her past life. Even if Owen wouldn't accept her as his master, she would find a way to ensure the 39 pair remained together. Listening to his master plan for his future, Noel felt a pang of sadness. He wished his master could find her own happiness too. Destined to live out my days with the title of princess, making small talk with someone I don't love. Suddenly, an idea sparked in Noel's mind. What if I help you get a divorce? From Noel's perspective, this marriage was nothing more than an unwanted political arrangement for both parties. There was no reason for Letitia to sacrifice her entire life for it. Letitia was stunned. In that moment, it dawned on her that she had been so preoccupied with her own feelings that she'd forgotten Dietrichian didn't want to marry her either. A rueful smile touched her lips as she opened her desk drawer. She pulled out a pre-written note and handed it to Noel. She wanted to meet with Dietrichian that evening, to tell the man she loved that she would give him back his freedom after 6 months of marriage. Thrilled, Dietrichian eagerly anticipated the meeting with the woman he adored. He had imagined countless scenarios for their conversation, but he never expected her opening line to be a request for a divorce. He was utterly bewildered. He had envisioned her laughing, blushing, perhaps even a little awkward, but divorce was the furthest thing from his mind. Letitia's reasoning was that she believed he had been forced into the marriage, and she wanted to restore his freedom after 6 months. Before their meeting, she would have been right. But after meeting him, her thoughts and heart were consumed by him. She wanted to be with him forever. Dietrichian had intended to tell her exactly that. But now, hearing her request for a divorce delivered with such finality, his heart felt as if it were being sliced open. If that is what you wish, I will respect your decision. Only he knew the agonizing pain behind those words. Letitia hesitated. She had another request. On their wedding night, she wanted to be prepared to deal with the people her aunt would send. Dietrichian misunderstood, thinking she didn't want to consummate the marriage and was asking him to play along. Don't worry, he reassured her. I won't force you. Letitia panicked. Her heart pounded her chest. She had to find the courage to explain. This was far more important than the divorce. Blushing furiously, she stammered, "Could you try coming a little closer?" Mortified, she wished she could disappear. But this was her chance to be with the man she loved. If they parted ways after agreeing to a divorce, she would regret it forever. When he didn't respond immediately, a wave of disappointment and regret washed over her. "I shouldn't have asked that of you," she murmured. "It's all right," Dietrichian said, taking a step closer. "Does my proximity displease you?" Without hesitation, Letitia shook her head. He couldn't displease her. Reassured, Dietrichian reached for her hand. "Then what should we do next?" he asked. Letitia was flustered. She hadn't thought that far ahead. As she pondered, their fingers intertwined. A moment later, Dietrichian gently kissed her forehead. Letitia gasped, thinking he was going to kiss her lips. The words divorce and wedding night echoed painfully in Dietrichian's mind. Yet, he was captivated by her. He couldn't give up. He didn't understand why she had given him a 6-month deadline, but it seemed that was all the time he had. He would be greedy. He would use every moment of those 6 months to win her heart. He lowered his head, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange of longing. Two souls, in love, yet separated by a misunderstanding. Letitia closed her eyes. He would make her fall in love with him. He wouldn't let her push him away. Back in her room, Letitia buried her face in her pillow, giddy with happiness. She had never felt so blissful. Dietrichian had been so tender. They had kissed again and again. By the end, her legs felt weak. "Did I ask too much of you?" Dietrichian's voice was incredibly gentle. Letitia squeezed her eyes shut and, in a voice much louder than she intended, exclaimed, "I'm so happy." She felt lightheaded, almost floating. She caught a glimpse of Dietrichian's flushed face and thought she heard him chuckle. She quickly pulled the pillow over her head. It was utterly humiliating. Meanwhile, the venomous Saintess was in excellent spirits. Not only had Noel knelt before her today, but he had also showered her with flattery. Still, she wasn't entirely convinced and ordered Owen to keep an eye on him. Report anything suspicious immediately. She would kill him without hesitation. Owen was both shocked and terrified. Last night, Noel had mentioned the second Saintess to him. He hadn't taken it seriously, because any second Saintess who appeared, whether real or fake, ultimately met the same fate, the guillotine. They had argued fiercely about it. Now, Noel's sudden pledge of loyalty to the Saintess was surely motivated by something else. After all, Noel despised the Saintess. Owen's mind was a whirlwind of confusion. The Saintess then gave him a task, handing him a box that seemed to contain a crystal ball. Upon seeing the object, Owen's face paled. It was a powerful monster, sealed by the Saintess. It dwelled in the desert oasis, possessing devastating destructive power and lethal force. Its tough exterior was impenetrable to even scythes and swords. Ordinary people were no match for it. Years ago, it had taken the sacrifice of several villages to seal it away. The moment he saw it, Owen knew what the Saintess intended. She grinned, a chillingly sweet smile. As soon as the duchy's envoy enters the desert, release it. The wicked Saintess, having married her daughter off to her enemy, planned to use her daughter's death as justification for war against the enemy nation. But the dragon's appearance had forced her hand. She intended to unleash the Pandora within the box upon the duchy's envoy during their return journey. But would the monster kill everyone in the envoy? Owen's heart pounded with unease. Even if it was his mistress's command, he couldn't hesitate, lest he arouse the Saintess's suspicion. "You wouldn't disobey me, would you? I wouldn't want to lose you." How could Owen refuse? He accepted the task, resigned to obeying his mistress. The Saintess, though displeased by his soft heart, still trusted his loyalty. After all, he wasn't like Noel. Speaking of Noel, the Saintess ordered Owen to bring him along on the day of the operation, to test the veracity of Noel's loyalty. If he makes any suspicious moves, kill him immediately. A sharp pang of pain shot through Owen's heart. This was the consequence of defying the Saintess. Knowing Noel's character, he wouldn't stand idly by and watch innocent people die. Owen knew he would be forced to choose, the Saintess or his beloved. There was no question who he would choose. That same night, a minor disturbance occurred within the Duchy of Pinos. 7 years ago, after the deaths of her eldest son and husband, the Duchess had regressed to a childlike state of mind. In the dead of night, she insisted on picking flowers in the courtyard, saying they would look beautiful on her child. And her child, lost in slumber, Gilead could foresee the future through his dreams. In his prime, the Empire dared not provoke the Duchy, for any plans they made would be revealed to Gilead in his dreams. But since the dragon's departure, the family had lost their gift of foresight. If only they could still dream. The male and female knights guarding the Duchess' side. Then the Duke wouldn't have to marry that wicked woman. Their voices caught the Duchess's attention. Looking at the blonde knight, she cried out joyfully, "My child!" The blonde knight played along, calling her mother, but the Duchess wasn't entirely satisfied. Mother felt too formal. She wanted to be called Mama, but would that be improper? She fretted over it. "But I still want to be your Mama." And in her eyes, the blonde knight transformed into a golden-haired queen, holding a rose, constantly praising her son. "That boy is very fond of you. He's just a bit slow, like his father." The two knights were utterly bewildered. They escorted the Duchess back to her chambers. The Duchess, praising her daughter's strength, asked for a bedtime story. The blonde knight, crowned with a garland of roses, patiently told a fairy tale to lull the Duchess to sleep. The queen rubbed her eyes, her eyelids heavy and drooping. She watched Noel with a deep reluctance. She had finally met the child and truly didn't want to part so soon. Such a sweet, endearing girl, soon to be her son's wife. The half-updo made her look especially lovely. She repeated the girl's name in her heart, over and over. Letitia, my child. Since finding his master, Noel had been like a tadpole finding its mother, overflowing with happiness. But with his master about to marry into the Noel kingdom, he felt like an abandoned puppy, his heart empty. Lately, he'd also been in a one-sided cold war with his beloved over the matter of the true and false saint. Owen didn't recognize the first night. Noel was saddened, yet relieved that Owen would escort his master to her new family. Given enough time, Owen would surely recognize the true saint. To his surprise, the saint herself had ordered him to accompany them. Suppressing his excitement, Noel thought the saint had truly done him a great favor. He ran through the corridor, eager to share the good news with his master. The wedding was tomorrow, and his master was likely trying on her wedding dress. He hummed a tune, bouncing like a playful puppy. The thought of his master in her wedding gown filled him with excitement. "Lady Letitia, I'm coming." But when he pushed open the door, he found Letitia being shoved to the floor by several maids. Noel was momentarily stunned. One of the maids then yanked his master's arm. "Stop pretending. Get up." He couldn't believe these sycophants would torment his only master while he was away. As one maid preened, a surge of water whipped her into the air. Noel stepped forward, demanding an explanation. Unrepentant, they spewed venomous words about teaching the brat a lesson, clearly crossing Noel's line. With another flick of his wrist, he sent them flying. One audacious maid dared to question his actions. "You're the ones who are out of line, you insolent wretches." Noel's face darkened, his aura inflicting visible pain on the maid. He had served the saint for a long time and had met all but the first of her 9 wings. Some were ferocious, some were ruthless, but Master Noel was different. He was not only easygoing, but also never used his power to threaten others. It was inconceivable to him that Master Noel could be so fierce. "If you do this again, I'll let you experience the joy of suffocating to death." The maids paled. Noel glared. "Get out." But seeing the countless needle pricks on his master's arm and the scattered pins on the floor, he regretted letting them go. He started to rise, intent on killing them, but Letitia grabbed him. "Didn't you already punish them? How can you kill someone over something so small?" Noel froze. His frustration erupted. "You're injured. How can you call that small?" Tears welled in his eyes. "How long are you going to endure this?" Letitia's heart ached. She embraced the sobbing Noel. She was only afraid for his safety, and she didn't want to become like her mother. Those who saw her as a holy sword, those who encouraged her, all met terrible ends. Her wings were always stained with blood. Letitia, unsure if she truly was the saint or why Noel was so devoted to her, knew one thing. Even if she gained divine power, she would never hurt anyone. Exhausted from the day's wedding preparations, she collapsed onto the bed. The good news of Noel accompanying her to the duchy, however, lifted a weight from her heart. "Perhaps Owen will recognize you before we even reach the duchy." Though Noel's words seemed unrealistic, Letitia still felt a flicker of hope. In her memories, Owen had always been her mother's most loyal protector. The idea of him pledging allegiance to anyone else was almost unimaginable. But none of that truly mattered. In this life, Letitia's only desire was Noel's happiness. Praying silently, she drifted off to sleep, only to be jolted awake by a terrifying nightmare. She found herself frantically pounding on a door, desperately calling out Owen's name. The dream had been vivid, a chilling echo of the past. A tragedy she had caused, the 39th unit's downfall, culminating in Owen taking the life of his own lover. The dream shifted to the temple, buzzing with gossip. The whispers, sharp and cruel, filled Letitia with a sickening dread. She overheard the maids talking about the Valinos incident, how the Ramal Empire had angered the saint, and how, upon the delegation's return, Owen, acting on the saint's orders, had unleashed the monstrous Valinos. Only Noel had emerged unscathed. Letitia bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. The memory finally clicked into place. The monster Owen had released before her rebirth, the one that had left her gravely wounded. A chilling premonition gripped her. Though the timing and the delegation were different, the fear of history repeating itself was overwhelming. She had to see Owen. She had to speak with him, just as she had the night before the Valinos incident in her past life. Owen was supposed to be setting up a barrier around the capital, but the wedding was tomorrow, and as head of security, he shouldn't be anywhere near the outer walls. Letitia rushed to Owen's quarters, but there was no answer. Had he gone to set up the barrier after all? Anxiety gnawed at her as she pounded on the door, calling his name. Suddenly, the Eli cell on her wrist began to glow. At the same moment, Owen stood on the city walls, drawing his sword. The barrier was the only way he could protect Noel, even if it meant Noel would never forgive him. "So this is how it ends," he murmured, plunging his sword into the focal point. He channeled the goddess-given power of the wind, weaving a protective shield against evil. Just then, a persistent banging reached his ears, accompanied by someone shouting his name. He stumbled, clutching his head. He asked the nearby knights if they heard anything, but they hadn't. How could no one else hear such a loud noise? Confused, he decided to finish the barrier and return quickly. But when he lifted his sword, nothing happened. Panic flared in his eyes. It wasn't the sword. His divine power was gone. And then, the strange banging returned. It was Letitia pounding on his door. He slumped against it, a wave of dread washing over him. Could Valinos' target have shifted from the Ramal Empire to the Duchy? It was just a guess, but so much had changed since his rebirth. Enoch's survival, his mother's early departure for the temple, Noel's immediate pledge of loyalty, and Dietrich's cold demeanor at their first meeting. Each event seemed inextricably linked to his return. He forced himself to calm down, desperately searching for a solution. Fighting Valinos in the desert was suicide. If only he could lure it to land, it would be much easier to deal with. But that would require either the power of the goddess or high-level magic. The image of Dietrich fighting to protect his knights, sacrificing himself, flashed through Letitia's mind. She had to help him. She clutched the Eli Sal on her wrist, praying for a response. The silence was deafening. Doubt gnawed at her. Was she truly a saint? Could she control monsters like her mother? But she refused to give up. Her only option was to reason with Owen. A sliver of hope remained, a memory of Owen helping her long ago. She waited, the hours stretching on, until the first rays of dawn painted the sky. Finally, Owen returned, looking utterly exhausted. The small vial of potion and a few words of concern were a great comfort to him in his isolation. Even under his mother's orders, this man had never harmed him. Letitia didn't want him to repeat his past mistakes. "Do you know about Valinos?" Owen asked, his face expressionless. He said he didn't know, but in his heart, he knew very well. Hadn't he just gone to the city walls to set up a barrier? Because of this, he wanted to hear the truth. But Owen's truth was that he hadn't set up a barrier anywhere. As he spoke, he noticed Letitia's swollen hand. He had something he needed to confirm. "Were you calling my name just now?" Receiving an affirmative answer, he seemed to understand something. He went inside and brought out a bottle of potion. He couldn't directly use his divine power. This potion was quite effective, if it was the same as in his past life. The difference this time was that he didn't use the excuse that it would leave a mark. Instead, he personally applied the medicine to Letitia's hand. Perhaps because tomorrow was the day of the national wedding, Letitia returned to her room with her head hung low. Owen saying he hadn't set up a barrier didn't mean he wouldn't release Valinos. But what you're worried about won't happen yet. From Owen's words, she could tell he still had time to think of a countermeasure. Letitia pondered in her room all night, finally greeting the morning of the wedding. These maids were acting strangely. She had never seen them so respectful towards her. Then she saw Noel appear at the doorway, arms crossed. "I'm here to look after Miss, on the saint's orders. And I'm a perfectionist." There was a threatening air about her, both spoken and implied. She wouldn't be held responsible if Miss wasn't dressed impeccably. Letitia had even silently mocked her. She hadn't expected them to actually fall for it. They were all doing their best. Even though she was wearing the same wedding dress as in her past life, this time it felt completely different. Her radiant and captivating appearance made Noel incredibly excited. "She's absolutely stunning. I have to wake Miss up before the wedding. Get out, all of you." After that came blatant praise. "You must be the most beautiful bride in the world." While the two were rejoicing, a major event occurred within the central temple. The goddess, who had been silent for years, sent down a divine oracle. And the content of the oracle could only be understood by the saint. "My only daughter." Seeing the first sentence, the saint was overjoyed. The goddess had finally acknowledged her as her daughter. But the next part of the oracle puzzled her. "The day you receive reverence is fast approaching. Although the wicked still disrupt order, this force is about to meet its demise. You will surely protect everyone." The saint froze. She had never protected anyone in her life. What did this oracle mean? But what did it matter? Whatever she said, the content of the oracle would become that. As she opened her mouth, preparing to spout nonsense, the goddess sent down a second oracle. Such a thing only happened when the empire was in mortal danger. The saint's face was smug. She fantasized about becoming the empire's hero. However, the content of this oracle sent a chill down her spine, for it was a warning directed solely at her. No matter how you distort my meaning, you cannot reverse time and change the original trajectory. Only death awaits you. She was thunderstruck, her legs weak. Even so, she still insisted that the oracle wasn't a good omen. A nearby priest, puzzled, pointed out that this wasn't the content of the first oracle. He voiced his question. The saint's eyes turned red, her whole body radiating killing intent. I am a saint chosen by the goddess. Are you doubting me? The goddess's true daughter had appeared, and she was just an imposter. Not only did she constantly misinterpret the goddess's meaning, but she also acted recklessly and wantonly killed innocent people. The priest had only asked one question, and he was killed on the spot by the false saint. She even ordered all the priests present were eliminated. The goddess's warning frightened him, and he quickly ran home. He opened a hidden compartment in the floor and took out a wooden box. This was the contract he made with a man in black when he became the acting saintess at the age of 15. The man promised to help him become the true saintess. The box was still there, meaning the man in black hadn't abandoned him. The goddess had sent down 2 divine pronouncements, which greatly displeased the child named Sieg. He was the ancestral black divine dragon, protector of the duchy. His power rivaled that of God. The reason he currently had the appearance of a child was because not long ago, to reset fate, he and the goddess Dinuit had joined forces to turn back time 3 years and save the true saintess, Lady Hai. The most powerful mage of the Maldo Empire had also participated, but exhausted his magic in the process. He can now only appear as dust. The goddess's power was also on the verge of annihilation. Now, she had consecutively issued 2 divine decrees. C grumbled, but he was worried. I couldn't help but retort, wondering who it was that nearly killed the imposter a couple of days ago in a fit of rage. Sieg became even angrier upon hearing this. That child had suffered so many injuries and had to endure the pain of being eroded by the curse. How could he stand it? Although Sieg's words were harsh, he, like Dinuit, was kind. Meanwhile, the wedding was about to begin. Dietrian had never been so nervous. He noticed that there wasn't even a chair placed for the bride's mother. He worried about whether he could successfully bring his bride home. He overheard a conversation downstairs. Apparently, the saintess had fainted from reading the Godstone Tear and wouldn't be attending. As he pondered this, Letitia appeared. His mind went blank. Her beautiful face, framed by the magnificent wedding dress, made Letitia radiant. Dietrian was overjoyed to be marrying such a lovely bride. At this moment, he truly wanted to thank the saintess. During the exchange of rings, he wondered if there would be a ceremonial kiss. What if he couldn't control himself like that night? He couldn't do that in public. He withdrew his hand, trying to suppress his excitement. As soon as the wedding ended, Dietrian looked at his watch, counting down the time until he could go to the bridal chamber and be with his bride. He sighed. Time was moving too slowly. The knights, hearing his sighs, felt sorry for him, wishing they could take his place with the witch. The author could only lament that they weren't on the same wavelength. Finally, night arrived. Dietrian knocked on the door of the bridal chamber. He was incredibly nervous. He kept muttering the lines he had prepared. "Don't worry, I won't do anything to you." Just as he entered, intending to reassure Letitia as he had practiced, he saw a pile of clothes on the chair. Letitia, fearing his embarrassment, had already prepared herself. Dietrian's eyes widened. He thought he was dreaming. This awkward situation left him at a loss. Although Letitia had said that the saintess's people would come at any time, he didn't want to force her. But since she was ready, it wouldn't be unreasonable for him to fulfill his husbandly duties. Dietrian felt like he was going crazy. Suddenly, the scent of alcohol filled the air. Letitia explained that she had had a little to drink because she was nervous. He picked up the bottle. "It seems I need a drink to relax too." On their wedding night, his bride was already drunk. Her coquettish and cute behavior almost made Dietrian lose control. He needed to pretend they were getting along before the saintess's lackeys arrived. But was this distance too far? Should he move closer? He reached out his hand. Letitia suddenly pressed herself against his chest. "I know you don't like being with me, but please bear with it. After all, I'll divorce you in 6 months, just as you wish." Dietrian finally understood. His wife had been thinking he loathed her all this time. He immediately sat up, wanting to clear up the misunderstanding. "It's so cold," Letitia murmured, snuggling closer and holding him tight. He felt his face flush, his heart pounding. "I need to tell you, I don't hate you, and I don't want a divorce." A tear traced a path down Letitia's cheek. "You're lying," she whispered, convinced he was only trying to comfort her. "Kiss me," she challenged, as Dietrian reiterated his sincerity. He gazed at his beloved, her eyes full of innocent vulnerability. "If I can feel your affection for me, then I'll believe you, right here, right now." Dietrian, who felt he had waited a lifetime for this, couldn't resist such a temptation. "Please believe me," he pleaded, leaning in to kiss her. The first light of dawn crept in. Letitia thought last night was a dream. He couldn't have been that forward. She rolled over, hoping to fall back asleep. When she woke up, everything would return to normal. Suddenly, Dietrian's voice startled her awake, making her bolt upright in bed. But the anticipated trouble from last night hadn't materialized. She remembered this night in her past life. Back then, she didn't understand Dietrian, convinced she would eventually die at his hands. This was also what her former self had wanted. So that night, when Dietrian approached her, she had screamed in terror. Several guards burst through the door, scolding Dietrian, a foreign ruler subjected to such humiliating fear. And it hadn't even been his fault. From that point on, although they shared a room, they kept their distance. Even their single kiss, it hadn't been a real kiss. Letitia had always felt guilty about that. That's why, on that other night, she had let Dietrian get closer to her. But then, her former self had fainted from the poison's effects. Her lackeys hadn't appeared either. While she worried whether this was a good or bad omen, several knights, swords at their sides, stormed into the room. They were ordered to leave the empire that very morning. Treated like prisoners, they were escorted to another palace. With every step, Letitia's heart clenched tighter. In her past life, her first meeting with the delegation hadn't been pleasant. Because of Enoch's death, the knights had practically wanted to skin her alive. Terrified, she had nearly burst into tears. Dietrian had not only defended her, but he had also court-martialed the disrespectful knights, expelling them from the military. She worried that if things played out as they had before, Dietrian would lose his most trusted knights again. So, she tried to minimize her presence, hoping to go unnoticed. But the moment she stepped inside, Enoch, the very man she had saved, stared at her with a beaming smile. Could something good have happened? Just as she was wondering, Vanessa appeared before her. Letitia's heart sank. Vanessa hated her the most, but in the next instant, this woman who loathed her flashed a wide, genuine smile. Letitia wondered if she had mistaken her for someone else. She had never seen Vanessa smile before, and the way she looked at her, it was almost identical to Noelle's gaze. Even stranger, the other knights of the delegation were also grinning at her, grinning like bandits. Letitia shivered. Were they smiling while cursing her? It was terrifying. "I'm willing to kiss you nonstop until you're satisfied." He'd thought she believed him, but upon waking, his wife had completely forgotten last night's events. It seemed his kiss hadn't moved her. Dietrian's heartfelt confession brought a blush to Letitia's cheeks. The man's confession from last night and his own impulsive kiss flooded Letitia's mind all at once. He felt dizzy, his vision blacking out. How could he have done such a thing? Dietrian was leaning in closer and closer, constantly reminding him not to forget last night. Letitia quickly covered the man's mouth with his hand. Dietrian looked at him as if to say, "How could you forget something so scandalous?" He squeezed his eyes shut, too embarrassed to look. It was the first time he'd ever drunk alcohol last night. That's why he was rambling and saying such strange things. It had to be. Watching Letitia's flustered and shy demeanor, Dietrian was captivated once more. He really wanted to see him even more flustered. While Letitia was still disoriented, Dietrian took his hand, then wrapped an arm around his waist. And then he kissed him. Letitia wouldn't be able to push him away, would he? Maybe he'd try to flee from his embrace. But Dietrian wouldn't let go. He would whisper, "I love you" in his ear over and over, and hold him even tighter, even closer. "Oh my God, please forget about my foolish behavior last night." Letitia's sudden apology snapped Dietrian out of his reverie. Inwardly, Dietrian resisted. He truly wanted to claim the young man before him. But he would respect Letitia. He wouldn't force him to do anything he didn't want to do. After all, someone who had been resented and unloved since childhood wouldn't easily believe they could be loved. He was afraid. He held Letitia's hand. "I promise you, only good things will happen from now on, because you deserve to be loved." After Dietrian left, Letitia's heart continued to race. The man seemed to have seen right through him, comforting him with a gentle tone. This was something that had never happened in his past life. Thinking about all the changes, he began to feel hopeful about the future. While he didn't dare to hope that Dietrian would fall in love with him, this time he wanted to embrace his husband as a wife and even act spoiled occasionally. His husband's tenderness made him feel like a person of worth. Human desire truly is endless. Thinking this, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. This much shouldn't be too much to ask for, right? He might as well treat all of this as a dream. Outside the door, Dietrian, hearing his subordinate's words, finally understood the meaning of speechless. Yesterday, at the wedding, the knights all looked like they were attending a funeral. Today, however, they were all smiles. He had found it strange. It turned out Enoch had recognized his savior, and he had spread the news that the princess consort wasn't Letitia. Dietrian broke out in a cold sweat. How was he supposed to explain this enormous misunderstanding? While this might be a good thing for Letitia, what would happen after they learned the truth? Would the knights still be so friendly? They would surely suspect Letitia of having ulterior motives. So, faced with Yukin's earnest confusion, he revealed the truth. The princess consort was Enoch's savior and the saintess's daughter, and the rumors about the murderer were all false. Letitia had merely taken the blame for his mother. He had never experienced a mother's love and had lived under her constant hatred and abuse. Letitia was more like a prisoner in this palace, but he had grown accustomed to such a life. Dietrian cursed under his breath, his heart aching. Yukin had never seen his highness like this. Not the dignified crown prince of a foreign land, but an ordinary young man of 23, venting his emotions like any other person. While this was what he had always longed for, what if he was being deceived? Dietrian saw right through his thoughts. But I saw all of that with my own eyes. And Letitia retrieved his brother's remains, defying the Holy Mother. Yukin was stunned. Even if his highness told him the sun rose in the west, he wouldn't hesitate to believe him. However, someone as stubborn as Vanessa would certainly not be persuaded. Rather than worrying about that, Yukin was more curious about what kind of person the princess consort was to have changed his highness so drastically in such a short time. And the stubborn person he spoke of was currently fuming with rage because of the princess consort. His nephew, though adorable, had a slight stutter. Having heard of the renowned healing abilities of the imperial priests, Bainshah insisted on sending his nephew to the Empire for treatment. When they met again, his nephew was a cold corpse. He was told the boy had angered Lady Letitia and suffered the consequences. The name Letitia echoed in his mind, consuming him with a burning desire to slaughter everyone in the Empire. In truth, he wanted to kill himself. He was the one who had forced his nephew to go to the Empire. He remembered the year his parents conceived him. His sister had been 15. She had been furious about his arrival, deeply resentful. Even so, after their parents died the following year, his sister raised him. She often threatened to abandon him, but she never did. Finally, his sister found her own happiness. She had a baby of her own. It was then that he truly understood the sacrifices his sister had made for him. But their joy was short-lived. His sister and her husband succumbed to a plague, leaving this world one after the other. He promised his sister he would care for his nephew, just as she had cared for him. But his sister, caressing his face, had said, "Just live your own life well." Those are her last words. Bainshah wept inconsolably. His nephew was dead because of him. He wished it had been him instead. Dietrian told him that the child's death wasn't his fault. Just like my brother died in the Empire to save me, and I couldn't even bring his body home. But it wasn't our fault. And it's not the fault of whoever killed your nephew. Thanks to the prince's guidance, Bainshah didn't remain trapped in his guilt, but he still loathed the Empire and its people. He had injured his leg on the journey to the Gong Kingdom. The injury was worsening, and he risked losing the leg entirely. He refused to let the prince grovel and beg the imperial priests to heal him. Babudrik had killed Letitia, but she was now the prince's wife, so he had to endure. He was relieved that Enoch had survived. He wouldn't have been able to live with himself otherwise. It was that woman who had saved Enoch, and in doing so, had saved him too. He regretted not being able to thank his savior when Enoch came to his room, saying he had found a savior, and she was the princess the prince had married today. This meant the princess wasn't the Shang Nu's daughter. He was astonished. How could they have suddenly changed brides? Enoch was certain the Shang Nu's daughter had refused to marry, forcing them to find a replacement. The gibberish Zheng Jinwei Zua Hanshodomari appears to be a typo or placeholder and has been omitted. The two exchanged knowing glances. They would have to be kinder to the princess from now on. But now, the prejudiced members of the imperial clergy were gathered, mocking their princess. They said she deserved to be locked up and whipped daily. Bainshot couldn't stand for it. He was going to kill them. Fortunately, Enoch stopped him. If they caused trouble, the princess would be dragged into it as well. Hearing this, they all shared a common goal: to protect the princess and keep her from harm. Only the tourists were unaware of this. Everyone was ready to depart, waiting only for the escort sent by the Empire. Horses couldn't be ridden in the desert, and Dietrian worried about his wife's ability to cope with the journey. He started to offer some advice, but Letitia already knew everything. She had injured her foot in her previous life because she hadn't been careful. A very good teacher had taught her all this. Still concerned, Dietrian thoughtfully wrapped his scarf around her neck. The desert winds were strong. Letitia wanted to refuse, but the scarf carried Dietrian's scent, and she couldn't bring herself to. Yukin arrived to report that the escort sent by the holy woman had arrived. Overjoyed, he searched for Owen and Noel, but it wasn't Noel who had come, but the depraved second semantic Tinia. The clearer the girl's green eyes became, the more he wanted to destroy her. The Shungnu, holy woman, had entrusted her daughter to him, saying the child had a manic disorder and imploring him to guide her onto the right path. Tinuya was incredibly annoyed. He was a ruthless killer, guiding someone towards righteousness. It was a joke until he saw the girl, her frail body, her slender wrists, and the countless marks of abuse. She had endured pain that many adults couldn't withstand. Yet, her eyes were still full of hope. He was instantly intrigued. If a goddess descended upon this world, she would surely look like this. And that was precisely why he had to destroy her. When Julius died, his opportunity arrived. You were close to that useless prince, weren't you? Such a pity he's dead. Hung on the city walls for months. His flesh picked clean by crows. The waste prince died because of you. Letitia, upon hearing this news, her eyes, as expected, filled with despair. Tinuya was ecstatic. He believed he would soon complete his mission. At this crucial moment, he received orders to travel on business. He'd only been gone a few days when Letitia regained her vitality, even smiling happily in front of him. The Shungnu asking him to replace Noel was certainly out of the question. It was simply a matter of escort. This worried Letitia. That memory made him tremble every time he recalled it. Back then, he was all alone, but now he had Noel. He still had much to do. Suddenly, the town crier's horn sounded. It was a sandstorm, but the rainy season was over. Logically, the desert shouldn't be experiencing wind. Sandstorms were rare, yet they were happening so frequently now. It could only be Timia's doing, because he, like Owen, possessed wind-based wings. Tinuya, looking at his handiwork, was immensely pleased. A villainous smirk spread across his face. This time, he would destroy Letitia for sure. But the anticipated struggle didn't come. In the past, Letitia would have already been knocked down by the wind. The toy he had broken had unexpectedly become brand new while he wasn't looking. It infuriated him. A larger sandstorm followed immediately. Yukin quickly urged everyone to get down, but it was too late. Letitia was about to be swept away. He couldn't help but cry out Dietrician's name in his heart. Suddenly, an arm wrapped around him. "Are you all right?" Someone shielded him. He struggled to open his eyes. It was His Highness. Dietrician had saved him. The sandstorm had been right in front of him just moments ago, yet he couldn't move. If it weren't for Dietrician, he would have been swept away. Ever since leaving the city, he had been extremely careful so as not to become a burden. He hadn't expected to become one anyway. After an unknown amount of time, the massive sandstorm finally subsided. It had come and gone without warning, like a monstrous, gaping maw threatening to swallow Letitia whole. This struck Dietrician as odd. Thankfully, she only suffered a few scrapes. Meanwhile, the loyal Minoel was about to explode with anger. His master and the envoy had left the capital. Even Owen was gone. He was all alone. He had been so excited about his mission to escort the envoy that he couldn't sleep. But just this morning, Owen had said that due to matters in the divine realm, his escort duty was canceled. What made it even worse was his replacement was Timia, the very person who loved to bully his master. The thought of Letitia in Timia's clutches made his blood boil. Tinuya would definitely hurt her. He had to go and protect Lady Letitia no matter what. Until Owen said sincerely, "I will protect Letitia. Please trust me." Besides, if he did that, it would easily arouse the saint's suspicion and put Letitia in a difficult position. Noel then nodded in agreement. After all, Letitia only had him as her wing, although he knew clearly that all he could do now was wait. But the thought of that guy being by his master's side made him want to kill Camilla with his own hands. However, he was no match for him at all. The strength of a wing's divine power was determined by the order of their awakening. How could he, the ninth, possibly defeat the second? Thinking of this, he suddenly realized something. Was he truly the ninth wing? The princess's face had been scratched by the wind. They had to stop and treat it. Letitia refused. He didn't want to be a burden to the envoy. Dietrian could only say they needed to reorganize their luggage, as much of it had been scattered by the sandstorm. The members of the envoy pricked up their ears. As soon as they heard the prince say this, they immediately collapsed to the ground, complaining of weak legs or broken packs. Your Highness, we request to rest where we are. Before they even received a response, Dingling Wang had already set up the tents. Letitia was bewildered. Did they really look that tired? He was pulled into a tent by Dietrian in a daze. This infuriated the pervert, Nuya. If it weren't for that guy, he would have already scarred Letitia's beautiful face. He grumbled and complained. Bowen is so disrespectful, not doing his job properly, and even finding it amusing to provoke a silencing. I can understand you wanting to defy the saint, he said, drawing his sword, preparing to duel Tenuya. He had never seen him like this before. He spoke bravely, but his heart was filled with fear. Although the strength of a wing's divine power was determined by the order of their awakening, it was also influenced by the saint and the individual themselves. Owen was undoubtedly the saint's most valued. If they fought, he wasn't sure of victory. He had no choice but to yield, saying he hadn't been an advisor before and wasn't quite used to it. Owen sheathed his sword, speechless. He thought he could have some peace, but then this pervert wanted Letitia. He wanted to keep him by his side and torture him slowly. Either let him leave or hand Letitia over. Owen was always single-minded, never disobeying the saint's will. That's why Nuya was certain Owen would hand Letitia over. I can agree. Sure enough, Owen agreed. With a triumphant smirk, he said he would go find E immediately. To his surprise, Owen meant for him to go play for 2 days. Was this still the same blockhead who only listened to the saint's orders? This sudden change of heart made him uneasy, but it didn't matter. He was free now. As soon as Tenuya left, the wind spirit found Owen. It turned out that he had been secretly protecting Letitia during the sandstorm. He had also seen Tenuya heading towards the village, seemingly intending to take his anger out on the villagers. Owen had to find something for the pervert to do. He asked the wind spirit to awaken several fox spirits slumbering underground. The spirit was worried. The saint wouldn't spare Owen if she found out. That was secondary. The most important thing was that he would have to endure the pain of breaking his promise. The reason Nuya obeyed the saint was his fear of this agonizing torment. Owen hesitated, then said, "Go quickly, before the villagers are harmed." He sent the spirit away. Then he fell to his knees in anguish. He had already disobeyed the saint's orders. The saint's task for him wasn't to escort, but to slaughter. He had lied to Tenuya, not only because of Noel's plea, but also because of that night when Letitia called his name. A voice suddenly echoed in his ears. "He is your only master. You must obey his will." He finally understood that what Noel had said about the upcoming divine tribulation was true. When divine power suddenly vanished from this world, only one person could achieve that. Perhaps Letitia would become the second saint of his new master. The pain racked his body, suffocating him. He couldn't bring himself to tell Letitia his thoughts, a nagging voice always whispering in his ear. Don't be fooled by Letitia. Josephine is your only master. Your husband is kind to him. He felt unworthy. They had faced the sandstorm together. Yet his husband remained dazzlingly handsome while he was covered in grime. Letitia's heart pounded faster and faster. Just helping him apply the ointment, his husband's gentle touch and gaze ignited a desperate longing within him, a yearning to kiss him, to be held in his arms. He even craved something more. Shame washed over him. How could he, in such a disheveled state, entertain such scandalous desires? The couple's tender moment was inadvertently overheard by the knights stationed outside the tent. They vaguely heard the princess say she could eat anything. Ever since learning that the princess was Enoch's savior, the Bansha crew had been eager to please her, yearning for her favor. But before departing from the empire, Yukin had warned them against getting too close to the princess, because even the monsters have prettier smiles than you lot. The men grumbled amongst themselves, dejected. They hadn't eavesdropped for long before their prince discovered them. Bansha and the others, mortified, stammered something about preparing a meal. I specifically told them not to come, and yet you're standing closest to the tent. Enoch hadn't expected the prince to be so blunt. But Dietrich wasn't angry. He was overjoyed that his entourage held Letitia in such high regard. He only hoped they would feel the same way once the truth was revealed. He ruffled Enoch's hair. Experiences are the most reliable source of truth. Trust your own judgment over rumors. Enoch didn't quite understand, but from the moment he met the princess, he knew she was an angel. The rest of the entourage felt the same. Upon hearing that the princess was hungry, they enthusiastically began preparing a meal. This was the first time the princess would eat their cooking. They had to showcase their culinary skills and ensure the princess enjoyed a delicious meal. Looking at the feast before him, Letitia's eyes lit up. This wasn't the kind of food he was given in his past life. He felt a pang of unease, worried that Dietrich's insistence on him eating well would create distance between him and his subordinates. His injury had already delayed the group's progress. He felt he didn't deserve such special treatment. Dietrich didn't understand. It was just a simple vegetable soup. Why did Letitia feel unworthy? He had initially thought Letitia simply disliked accepting kindness from others. But now it seemed Letitia was convinced everyone hated him. Perhaps from his perspective, it was understandable. After all, he was the son of a leftover woman. The thought filled Dietrich with a deep sadness. He had planned to tell Letitia upon their return to the duchy that he had already learned about him from his brother's letters. Dietrich wasn't ready to reveal everything just yet, but he could assure Letitia of one thing. None of them hated him. Only good things awaited him in the future. I will strive to make you happy. While I can't guarantee that everyone in the world will love you, I will ensure that everyone in the duchy loves and cherishes you. If you'll allow it, let me spend the rest of my life protecting you. Letitia fought back tears, a mixture of shock and warmth flooding his heart. It's all right to cry. Dietrich's gentleness broke through his defenses. Every word seemed to mend the wounds within his heart. Meeting Dietrich was nothing short of a miracle. He wanted to do something for him in return. He remembered how, in his past life, Banesha's pride had led to a crippling injury, costing him a leg and ending his knighthood. So, while Dietrich was away on inspection, he sought out Bansha. He planned to meet Owen alone, hoping to ask him to heal Banesha's leg. He just wasn't sure if Owen would agree. But before he could seek Owen out, Owen found him. Just moments before, he'd heard Letitia calling for him. She spoke of healing Banesha's leg. Without hesitation, he agreed. He didn't know why, but he felt a desperate urge to help the girl before him. Letitia then recounted everything to Owen, how her mother had treated him, how she had made him a scapegoat. This reminded Owen of the first time he met Letitia. She had been so frail, as if a gust of wind could knock her over. How could such a person be a murderer? Yet, the saintess had warned him not to be deceived by her false appearance. And then, along with Tenua, they had taken the girl into the room. Owen, what are you doing? You should be rescuing your true master and punishing those who harmed her. Owen froze, but then another voice urged him to remember Josephine, claiming she was his true master. His thoughts snapped back to the present. Who was his true master? Suddenly, Dinu would appear behind him, dispelling the demons that clung to him. In an instant, Owen understood. His true master was Letitia. He had been blinded for so long. At that moment, Letitia's second wing was born. The goddess descended behind him. A single command, stand down, banish the darkness. A sharp, agonizing pain shot through Owen. His true master was right before him, and he had been oblivious for so long. At that moment, Letitia's second wing finally awakened. But before all of this, the envoy's party continued their arduous journey through the desert. Bansha was utterly miserable. He had previously made a fuss about wanting to kill the saintess, so the commander wouldn't allow him anywhere near the princess. The commander had even said they looked too bizarre, and he feared the princess wouldn't be able to handle it. He was incredibly frustrated. He and Enoch were clearly the best looking in the entire envoy. After several rounds of analysis, the two of them came to a conclusion. The princess must have been frightened by the others, but they, of course, were different. So, while the Duke was out scouting, they decided to circumvent the commander and, well, first do this, and then do that, and then they would surely win the princess's favor. The two narcissists grew increasingly excited as they talked. They hadn't noticed the princess suddenly staring at them. Her gaze seemed to be searching for some hidden secret. Could she have overheard their conversation? No, it was impossible. The two were instantly mortified, their embarrassment so profound they could have excavated a 3-bedroom apartment with their toes. Not only were they overly confident in their appearance, but they also wanted to monopolize the princess's affection. If she had heard them, they wouldn't just be finished, they'd be dead. Sure enough, as soon as they settled down for the night, the princess came looking for them. Banesh's heart dropped. Before the princess could even speak, he jumped up and yelled, "I'm so sorry. I really don't think I'm good looking. And while we do want to monopolize your affection, we're even happier that you chose the duchy affection." Letitia was completely bewildered. It turned out everyone was grateful because he had saved Enoch, and they believed he had even taken the saintess's daughter's place in marriage, so the prince wouldn't have to marry that wicked woman. This confused him even more. He had saved Enoch, but he'd never told anyone. How did Bain-Sha know? And taking the saintess's daughter's place? Why did everyone have this misconception? Could it be Dietrichian? Had he lied to protect him? It seemed Dietrichian, like him, had been silently protecting him. Tears welled up in his eyes. He longed to rush into Dietrichian's arms, but he still had something important to do. He needed to heal Banesh's leg, but Bain-Sha still refused to admit it was injured. He even tried to jump up to prove he was already healed. How long are you going to keep hiding this? Letitia had no choice but to move out of Dietrich. This panicked Bernesha, who desperately wanted to avoid causing any trouble for the prince. Though two powerful winged beings resided there, capable of healing his leg with a mere flick of their fingers, he refused to accept their help. The thought of his beloved nephew, brutally murdered by those very people, made him prefer a life with a crippled leg to accepting aid from the Empire. He pleaded helplessly, "Please, just pretend you don't know." Despite his words, fear gnawed at him, fear of how he would live with a missing leg. But even greater was the fear of succumbing to that terror and groveling before the very people he despised. "I'm sorry," he choked out. Letitia firmly rejected his plea. "Do it for your sister. Do you remember her last words? She wanted you to live a good life." "How do you know my sister's last words?" Bernesha stammered, disbelief etched on his face. Letitia didn't answer. In her eyes, temporarily setting aside his pride, would allow him to protect something far more precious. Besides, she continued, "As the prince's knight, are you going to abandon him? Leave him to protect the kingdom alone when he needs you most?" Her words struck a chord within Bernesha. The hardened warrior's heart began to soften. He could feel the princess's urgency in the gentle pat of her hand on his shoulder, as if trying to pull him from the abyss of his hatred. He knew he would never forget this moment. The thought of the princess kneeling for him filled him with panic. "Absolutely not," he exclaimed. He remembered the day after the wedding, how those imperial knights dared to call the princess a brat. He'd wanted to tear their mouths apart. If they were to ask for help, they might make even more outrageous demands. "Absolutely not," he repeated, his heart pounding. This wasn't the first time he'd felt this desperate urgency. He'd seen the prince kneel for others, claiming it was his duty as crown prince. He hated his own helplessness in those moments. All he could do was cling to the hope that the crown prince and princess would never have to sacrifice themselves for anyone again. He would sell his soul for that. Is that your true desire? Are you truly willing to live only for them? A voice suddenly echoed in his mind. Who is speaking? To repay the daughter of his enemy, he decided to sell his soul. This sincerity moved a goddess. Are you truly willing to live only for them? Before he could understand what was happening, Letitia smiled, touched by his devotion. He never would have imagined that the person who hated him most in his past life would now be concerned for his well-being. "Thank you," she whispered. He insisted on going, determined to help in any way he could. Just as Bernesha was overwhelmed with emotion, the captain appeared, holding the princess's scarf. It was then that the princess revealed Bernesha had been hiding his injury, not wanting to worry anyone. The captain was so furious he wanted to break the injured leg himself. But Bernesha had his pride. The captain let him leave for now, hearing the princess intended to ask the winged for help. He couldn't help but worry. In their eyes, the princess was less than dirt. "Don't worry," Letitia said, a wry smile touching her lips. "I'm Josephine's only daughter, after all." Mentioning her noble lineage felt strange. Seeing the captain's unsurprised expression, She realized he'd known the truth all along. But the priority was healing Bernesha's leg. Though she felt confident, she couldn't be certain. Owen was her mother's winged. If he refused, she even considered invoking Noah. She never expected Owen to seek her out. He readily agreed to her request. She was overjoyed but also bewildered. Why would Owen help her? Could it be because of Noah? Is Noah all right? He's trying to figure out why Noah was replaced by Nuya. Perhaps Her Highness the Saintess felt Noah wasn't suitable for this mission. That's why she replaced him with Tenuya to escort the envoy. He didn't believe a word of Owen's explanation. Tenuya, Mother's henchman, how could he possibly accept an escort mission? Unless the real mission isn't protection, but a massacre. But Owen's actions seemed defiant. He actually disobeyed Mother's orders. Was it for Noah, whom he loved deeply, or was it because of the imitation Illiser he possessed? To confirm his suspicions, he decided to gamble. Am I your master? Owen's pupils dilated sharply. He hadn't expected Letitia to be so direct, but he couldn't distinguish who his true master was. He'd been searching for the answer, but to no avail. So he chose to follow his heart. His face paled. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Letitia was astonished. Owen was suffering the pain of a broken oath. When had it begun? She grew increasingly suspicious of herself. Was her unawakened self truly victorious? Even though Owen was clearly in agony, she selfishly thought, what if he can't be healed because of the pain? What about Barnes? What if he had to choose between Mother and me? What if Owen doesn't choose me? These thoughts made her blush crimson. After much agonizing, she finally mustered the courage to tell him everything. How her mother had framed her. How she had been slandered. She laid bare the whole truth, begging Owen to stop seeing her as a murderer. Just as the misunderstandings were clearing up, a commotion erupted outside the tent. Apparently, the conversation between the envoy leader and the princess had been overheard by Barnes, who had exceptionally keen hearing. The princess was truly a spinster, it seemed. Thanks to his loose lips, everyone in the envoy heard the leader offer an explanation. Some weren't happy. What good could come from a spinster's daughter? What abuse? Maybe that woman fabricated the whole story. Barnes didn't believe it either, but hearing the princess insulted, he reacted without thinking, grabbing the offender by the collar. Before that situation could be resolved, another arose. A subordinate reported that the only water source had been contaminated with Cyclops poison, and Tyrion hadn't returned. Letitia was worried sick. Could this be Tenuya's doing again? The man kissed his wife's hand. The silver bracelet flashed blindingly. With a whoosh, a small black box appeared. Tyrion knew. It was his brother, the brother he had always looked up to. He hadn't expected to see his brother again, as a box of ashes. Letitia saved your brother. You can finally go home. Grief mingled with a deepening love for Letitia. Like an ever-expanding balloon, it reached a point he could barely contain. He hadn't been gone a day, and Letitia had not only discovered Barnes's leg injury, but had also risked her life to seek help from the spinster's wing. And she went alone. No matter how much his subordinates tried to explain, he couldn't suppress his rage. Ever since they had entered the desert, the wing had summoned storms and even poisoned the well. And judging by the strange look on Letitia's face when she first saw the wing, she must have known she was in danger. Yet she still met with them alone. Looking at his wife, sleeping like a log, his heart ached. He should have told her everything sooner. Clutching his brother's ashes, he began to speak. From his first encounter with Letitia, to the time she was beaten unconscious, including the dilapidated palace that even rats wouldn't inhabit, he calmly told everyone in the envoy everything. Even those who had previously been clamoring about the crown princess's wickedness and prejudice were now overflowing with sadness. The misunderstanding was cleared up almost instantly, and everyone was overjoyed. Vanessa, however, found it hard to believe that the Saintess's daughter could be so kind. But a persistent image kept flashing through her mind, a vision of the Saintess tormenting her daughter. It was this that finally changed her opinion. Meanwhile, within the divine palace, anxiety filled the air. Ever since the appearance of the divine jade, the Saintess had not only failed to attend her daughter's wedding, but had also remained locked in her chambers. Everyone began to speculate about the contents of the divine jade, wanting to ask, but lacking the courage. Their only recourse was to fetch Noel, hoping that perhaps the Saintess would open the door for him. "This is so frustrating," someone muttered. Noel's attention was entirely focused on Letitia. He worried about whether that scoundrel Camilla might be mistreating her. As for the Saintess, whether she lived or died was of little concern to him. But the thought of Owen looking after his master in his stead pricked his conscience, making him feel selfish. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. It was Josephine. He rushed over, albeit reluctantly, drawing his knightly blade and slashing at the door. He hadn't anticipated that the Saintess had already sealed the door with divine power. "This woman and her tricks," he grumbled, while simultaneously ordering everyone to stand back. After all, only by ensuring the Saintess's safety could he give Owen a proper accounting. Ignoring the sarcastic whispers around him, he donned his divine power gauntlets. Inside, the Saintess was already tormented by the message within the divine jade. The words, "The only ending that awaits him is a gruesome death," echoed in her mind, robbing her of sleep. She constantly worried about her divine power fading. Looking at the scars on her arm, and her own erratic laughter, she was convinced that the dragon was behind it all. She remembered the mysterious person she'd made a deal with, saying, "The dragon race is the embodiment of evil. They will resort to any means to obtain what they desire, including the dragon's descendants," she thought. "Therefore, I must strike first and eliminate the threat entirely." Although she could strip the honorable king of everything, she couldn't kill him directly. Just as the dragon feared karmic retribution, she could only threaten him in this way. The same principle applied to her inability to kill him, but she had the special drug. The thought of the honorable king's utter despair after the annihilation of the envoy, and the image of Letitia being tortured, filled her with perverse joy. It was only a shame she couldn't witness it firsthand. With this thought, she sliced her palm, deciding to unleash a curse just for fun. After all, the dragon had suffered severe injuries while preventing her from using the drug before. She was certain he wouldn't intervene again. Drop by drop, her blood fell onto the magic circle, activating the strongest curse, intending to make Letitia bleed from all 7 orifices and suffer an agonizing death. Owen could heal her afterward anyway. But just as the curse was unleashed, the door was blasted open. "Noelle, what are you doing?" The woman's cutting her palm and letting her blood flow. "Do you think she's gone mad?" But she's just casting a curse for fun. The more her daughter suffers, the greater the pleasure she derives. Suddenly, a thunderous boom echoed as the door was reduced to splinters and rubble. Her disheveled appearance became a captivating sight for Noelle, though he had to feign concern. "Oh dear," he exclaimed. "Saintess, are you all right?" The Saintess was initially furious, but seeing his increased strength and unwavering loyalty, her anger dissipated. She even entertained the delusional thought of slaying the divine dragon. At that very moment, the dragon also contemplated killing her. Having absorbed Letitia's curse, he had just coughed up a copious amount of blood. As he attempted to stand, he tripped on a stone, landing face first with a resounding thud. His close friend's relentless mockery only added insult to injury. Life is truly unpredictable, he thought ruefully. Talk about a twist of fate. Gazing at the twinkling stars above, he was once again lost in memories of the past. "Lord Sig, did you know? They say when people die, they become stars. That way, surrounded by their family, they won't be lonely." The girl's words were filled with longing. He couldn't understand. Why would humans yearn for those already gone? Could longing bring them back to life? If they want to see them, couldn't they just dig up their graves? But soon he understood, because he fell in love with a girl. Even though a human life spanned only a few short decades, he chose to marry her. Together, they built a kingdom. Decades passed, until the day the girl closed her eyes before him. Watching over her descendants became his only solace. Eventually, he had to leave. Yet, Dynet remained, steadfast in his protection of his people. He trusted Dynet to care for his descendants. But after Josephine became the Saintess, everything began to unravel. He couldn't kill the madwoman directly. However, judging by the intensity of the curse today, her end was near. The awakening of a wing is triggered by danger. The awakening of a Saintess follows the same principle. Letitia had been worried sick since hearing the news of the poison spring. Only when the reassuring red firework lit up the sky did he collapse in relief. He had been asleep for 3 days and nights since that evening. Dietrian had no choice but to carry him as they journeyed. Waking in a daze, he saw that he had become a burden to his husband and reassured him, "Just bear with me a little longer." Overcome with guilt, he said, "Just leave me here." "Never," came the reply. "I will never abandon you in this life." Hearing his husband's words, he drifted back into a deep sleep, his heart heavy with self-reproach. A woman's laughter echoed in his dream. "I've always wanted to meet Letitia." We finally meet. He had been dead for 10 days and 8 nights, yet not entirely dead. And he saw a beautiful woman, raven black hair, a gentle face. She looked so much like him. Letitia wept uncontrollably. "Why did it take you so long? Why are you only seeing me now?" Like a lost child who had found his mother, he sobbed in the woman's arms. He didn't understand why he felt this way, but the woman's comfort brought him immense warmth. "Don't worry, you will be happy." Her words filled him with strength, yet he remained asleep, lost in his dream. Owen was worried sick. He was just about to check on Letitia when golden petals suddenly rained down upon the desert. But aside from him, the rest of the envoy seemed oblivious, as if they were blind. And that familiar scent, that déjà vu, he suddenly remembered. The books said that upon awakening, a saintess would fall into a deep slumber to gain power. The greater the power, the longer the sleep. On the day a new saintess is born, flowers of all seasons bloom in celebration. Everything he saw confirmed it. Letitia was awakening. Suddenly, a hand reached out from nearby. "What's happening? Am I hallucinating?" Seeing the man's reaction, Banith's face was filled with disbelief. After all, only a wing could see the golden petals. Could this man be Letitia's wing? "Hey, what's your name?" Banith instinctively started to answer, but seeing that the other person was an imperial priest, he clammed up, remembering his captain's warning to avoid trouble. He finally gave his name. To his surprise, the priest burst into laughter, looking at him with a peculiar glint in his eyes. Suddenly, with a whoosh, Banith's leg was enveloped in a flash of emerald green light. He yelped in fright, suspended in midair. And in that instant, his injured leg suddenly became radiant, completely healed without a trace of the injury. It was truly incredible. Before Letitia could react, Owen spoke to her in words she couldn't understand. "If you want to awaken, come find me. But great power comes with a corresponding price." She seemed to understand, but not entirely. The day after their conversation, Letitia woke inside the carriage. Her memory lingered 10 days prior. She remembered Kamaya's poisoning attempt. Although she had seen the reassuring fireworks, she still worried. Seeing Tyrion's shocked face, she croaked out questions. Thankfully, everything had ended smoothly. Everyone was safe. They had even found thirst-quenching red berries. It turned out she had slept for a full 10 days. Hearing this, Tyrion was filled with regret. Although the winged ones said Letitia's collapse was due to a unique constitution, he felt it was his fault that his beloved had slept for so long. He took Letitia's hand. "There's something I need to confess. I knew what kind of life you were living from the moment we first met. And even earlier, 7 years ago, I learned of your existence from my brother's letter. Later, I received news of his death." He had tried to avoid thinking about Letitia for a while, but the moment he saw her at the temple, he recognized her instantly. Perhaps he had fallen in love with this girl long ago. The overwhelming rush of information left Letitia flustered. She couldn't even look him in the eye. Tyrion excused himself, wanting to be alone. In truth, he was practically suffocating from happiness. Whether in her past life or this one, this man had never hated her. Could this be another dream? Speaking of dreams, she thought of that woman, someone she had never met, yet felt a deep connection with. The words, "You are my true agent," a title only a Shunshu could deserve. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly began to glow. She was astonished to find that the cracks on the previously black gemstone were now gone. Owen knelt before her, his forehead striking the ground with earth-shaking force. He prostrated himself, celebrating his master's successful awakening. Letitia worried he would dirty his face, but he insisted he was a sinner, unworthy of such a fate. For when his master was beaten and thrown into the snow, he had merely watched from the sidelines, snacking on sunflower seeds and sighing. How was he any different from that despicable cousin and lost you forever? Even 1,000 deaths couldn't atone for his inaction. Crimson liquid trickled down his forehead. He needed to redeem himself. "Why don't you just revoke my status as your second wing?" Letitia was initially stunned. Why the sudden kneeling? But now she understood. Owen was her second wing. "Get up," she commanded. "That is my order." Seeing Owen's continued refusal, she smiled brightly. "So, my second wing is quite persistent. I wonder how heartbroken Noelle would be if I revoked your status." Sitting by the fountain, Letitia recounted a dream she hadn't even shared with Noelle. In the dream, Noelle not only helped her escape, but also turned against her lover. She even sacrificed her own life. Yet, given another chance, Noelle still chose her. Every time she thought about it, she felt guilty. So please, don't let go of Noelle's hand. And thank you for becoming my wing. Although she spoke of it as just a dream, Owen felt the unbearable sorrow within it. He couldn't help but wonder if it was truly just a dream or something that had actually happened. And now, with Owen and Noelle as her center, Letitia could control both water and wind. She was filled with anticipation. When she first saw Ilzir, she had thought he was worthless. It was unexpected. Not only had it helped her immensely, but it also granted her the power of a goddess. Owen explained that this power could also turn wishes into reality. That was the very purpose of Elizer's existence. Yet, hearing this news, Letitia felt no joy. Her only wish was to be with Dietrich, happily, for the rest of her life. But that wish seemed impossible. She remembered her mother's smug words as she cursed her, boasting that the curse held a unique essence, impervious even to a goddess's intervention. For her to live, Dietrich had to die. The tragedy of her past life stemmed from her selfish desire to live. She truly didn't want to repeat the same mistake. But now, as the goddess's agent, possessing 2 wings, perhaps a little fantasizing wouldn't hurt. What if a miracle happened? Then she could be with Dietrich forever. The thought brought a tearful smile to her lips. Having never experienced a mother's love, she yearned to have a child of her own, a true family, and it would also heal Dietrich's lonely heart. Speaking of which, she asked Owen when he planned to propose. The sudden question brought a blush to Owen's face. But the next second, he suggested Letitia be their child's godparent. My goodness, they weren't even married yet, and they'd already found a guardian for their future child. Letitia's expression turned troubled. It wasn't that she was unwilling, but by then, she might already be dead. Moreover, the duchy was so far from the empire, she doubted she could fulfill her duties. But as soon as she voiced her concerns, Owen gave her a reason she couldn't refuse. Because wherever the master is, the wings are there too, meaning they would always be together. The continuous stream of good fortune felt like a beautiful dream. Seeing Dietrich's growing concern for her made her realize how greedy she was becoming. She had more and more reasons to live, more and more people she couldn't bear to leave. Lost in thought, she was startled when Dietrich suddenly turned to her. Everyone's ready. Let's go in. Looking at his outstretched hand, she hesitated. Earlier, after receiving a flying message from Owen requesting a meeting, she had glimpsed through a crack in the door the embassy staff excitedly preparing a party. It must have been someone's birthday. Not wanting to spoil the fun, she had hurried away. She hadn't expected Dietrich to invite her. Can I really join in? At 18, she had endured 19 years of abuse from her own mother. Yet today, she was being treated with kindness by strangers. To welcome her to the duchy, everyone had secretly prepared this party. Even those who had once berated her now offered sincere apologies. Feeling cherished for the first time, Letitia was overwhelmed with emotion. I'm the daughter of the leftover woman, she said, her voice thick with feeling. Everyone exchanged smiles, expressing their faith in her character, causing her to bury her face in her hands, overcome with emotion. Her desire to live burned brighter than ever. She drank happily tonight. In Dietrich's arms, she laughed like a carefree young girl, nuzzling the warmth of his face. She eventually fell asleep in his embrace. Dietrich gently laid her down. Looking at her peaceful face, his heart ached. Although everyone was happy tonight, he still couldn't understand. Her word from earlier, I know I shouldn't get my hopes up, but I really don't want to give up. She had spoken as if she were being forced to relinquish something precious. He had wanted to ask her right then and there. But judging by Letitia's stubborn nature, she wouldn't have told him the truth. He knew her seemingly happy smile masked a deep sadness. Sitting by her bedside, he felt a profound sense of loneliness. No, no, Letitia suddenly cried out, thrashing in her sleep, until she heard her husband's voice. Holding her husband's hand, Letitia jolted awake from a nightmare. Did you have a terrible dream? Dietrich asked. Yes, a truly awful one, she replied. She had dreamt of Dietrich's last moments, his receding figure before death. But she felt a little better now. Dietrich, too, often woke from nightmares when he was young. He had a trick for dealing with them, he told her once. Create good memories to wash away the pain of the bad ones. Letitia's sudden openness made Dietrich wonder if he was still dreaming. Her words gave him an idea. He held her hand and kissed it gently. Letitia, he whispered, pretend this is a dream. In dreams, anything is possible. Tell me everything you desire, everything you've had to give up, everything you fear most. His words, combined with the lingering effects of the alcohol, brought a haze of thoughts to Letitia's mind. She thought of her closest family, of the things she longed for most. I want to live, she sobbed. I don't want to die. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed the curse her mother had placed upon her. I'll be dead in 6 months. Dietrich was stunned. How could a mother do such a thing to her own daughter? He wanted to ask more, to understand. But Letitia had already drifted back to sleep. He held her close, his heart aching with pity and burning with rage. He wanted to kill the woman, that monstrous mother, but fear held him back. What if killing her made the curse permanent? He suddenly understood Letitia's insistence on a divorce in 6 months. She planned to die alone after leaving him. If she knew he knew the truth, she might leave immediately. He decided to feign ignorance. The first light of dawn crept through the window. Letitia woke with a headache, but the memory of the previous night's tenderness lingered. She felt like a princess in a fairy tale, surrounded by love. But the more intense the happiness, the sharper the pain in her heart. She truly didn't want to die. Tears welled up again. Dietrich caught her crying. Quickly, she claimed it was just a bad dream. Another lie, another deception. It solidified Dietrich's resolve. He would follow his heart, no matter the cost. Taking her hand, he knelt before her. May I kiss you? He asked. Before she could react, he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers. How does that feel? He murmured. They were desperately in love, yet one of them was destined to die. Because of her mother's curse, Letitia had only 6 months left to live. The secret she'd revealed in her drunken confession sparked a primal urge in Dietrich, the urge to confront his mother-in-law. But what hurt him most was Letitia's deception when she was sober, her continued attempts to distance herself from him. He couldn't bear it any longer. He pulled her close and kissed her again, this time with more force. How does this kiss compare to the one on the night you asked for a divorce? He whispered. He watched as a blush crept up her cheeks. Though she didn't speak, he understood. He took her hand in his. Each kiss a mixture of tenderness and passion. He hoped that in these fleeting moments of sweetness, Letitia could forget her pain, even for a little while. His gaze was intense, filled with a possessive, almost dangerous longing, even though a flicker of fear ran through her. Letitia wanted to be closer to him. Kiss me again, she whispered. After a night of shared intimacy, Dietrich was consumed with grief. He prayed silently, bargaining with any god that would listen. Save Letitia, he pleaded. I'll do anything. A voice, sharp and jarring, echoed in his mind. You cannot repeat the past. Perhaps it was just bad reception. The voice was broken and halting. Who are you? He desperately wanted to see the speaker's face. But in an instant, he was back in the Duchy of Xenos. Rain lashed down on the royal city, shrouding everything in gloom. His loyal subordinate died before his eyes. But no matter how real it felt, it was just a dream. Yet the agonizing pain in his abdomen left him powerless to fight. Do you want to live? Beg me. The moment he saw his mother-in-law's wicked grin, he cursed her as a demon and lunged to attack, only to cough up a mouthful of blood. What's worse, he didn't even have a sharp sword. His mother-in-law then told him to give up his life in exchange for survival. Apparently, this was the way to break the curse. He burst out laughing, picking up a broken arrow. Smiling, he pointed it at his chin, his blood-smeared face filled with a strange sense of triumph. Josephine, you lose. He'd infuriated the old witch. But as the arrow pierced his throat, the pain felt so real that Dietrichian couldn't help but wonder if it truly was a dream. The voice echoed again, warning him not to repeat his mistakes. He finally realized the voice was trying to help him. Though he didn't understand the context of the dream, one thing was certain, breaking the curse required his life. This definitely seemed like something his mother-in-law would concoct. He remembered Letitia mentioning divorce after 6 months and begging him to leave her in the desert. Letitia had known the solution all along, but had chosen to protect him instead of fighting for herself. Was it because of her brother? Whatever the reason, he would never let his wife die. The man was a beast. After seducing his wife the previous night, he dismissed it as a joke in the morning. He hadn't expected Letitia's genuine affection, her childlike joy. Though the night had been sweet, he regretted it upon waking. What if she became even more attached? The thought of Diotrician's devastation after his death drove him mad. He couldn't even bear to face his beloved. He finally managed to dress, then stalled by fumbling with his buttons, only to be caught in the act. He lied about buttoning them wrong, but she wasn't fooled. He decided to play the villain, telling her not to take last night seriously. But before he could finish, Diotrician said the same thing, claiming it meant nothing. He was both surprised and disappointed. Diotrician wasn't one to lie, but this was the outcome he wanted. He never expected such dishonesty from a usually straightforward man. Since he'd already learned to lie and had already deceived her, he decided to do it again, all for the sake of being closer to him. Diotrician stammered, "Could I ask you a favor?" As the ruler, his every action, including his married life, was under scrutiny. So he asked Letitia to help him maintain a charade by sharing a room every night. She readily agreed. His heart pounded with nervous excitement. Pushing his luck, he made another request. "Could you, for the next 6 months, pretend to be deeply in love with me?" Public displays of affection would reassure those who cared about him. "How should we do that?" she asked earnestly. Like occasional hugs and kisses, whispering sweet nothings to each other, things like that. Finally having voiced his desires, he felt like he was dreaming. He hadn't expected her to agree so readily. After their clandestine agreement, they strolled hand in hand through the garden. To show off to the 3 onlookers in the distance, he put his arm around her waist. He held Letitia tightly in his arms. His heart was practically bursting with happiness, but he couldn't let it show too much. Unexpectedly, Letitia was even bolder. She nestled shyly against him, but felt it wasn't enough. After all, even friends could hug. Her heart was pounding like a trapped bird. "I want to kiss you every day." What a bold declaration. "Are you serious?" Diotrician looked secretly thrilled. Did he think once a day was too little? Should we do it more often? Had anyone ever seen such a courtship? Both trying to convince the other they weren't in love, yet pouring their hearts out. Their sweetness made everyone around them envious, wishing they could fall in love right then and there. But on the other side of the castle, a scene of hellish carnage unfolded. The Cheongju's son, covered in blood and near death, stared longingly at the place where the sacred chalice should have been. The Cheongju cradled his son, weeping inconsolably. "What do you want?" he cried. But Trenua, that scheming snake, didn't give a second thought. He already had what he wanted. The useless princess unleashed her true power for the first time and plunged the entire city into panic. The water clinging to her clothes and the bottomless lake itself vanished in an instant, as if they had never existed. Letitia woke in the middle of the night, and before she could snuggle into her husband's arms, the wind spirit appeared. Although the spirit seemed cheerful, Letitia knew something was wrong in the city. But she never imagined that Trenua, that treacherous fiend, had murdered the Cheongju's son and stolen the sacred stone that protected the city. Thankfully, Owen intervened in time, and the Cheongju's son clung to life. But the loss of the sacred chalice was a grave matter. This city, standing defiantly in the desert, relied entirely on the chalice for its water. But it had begun to malfunction even before their arrival. The Cheongju and his son, fearing the saint's wrath, deceived everyone. They had hoped to enlist the saint's wing to repair it. But instead, they contacted the bloodthirsty and treacherous second wing. Even Trenua thought they were fools. But now wasn't the time to discuss intelligence. Owen knew that when the city's water dried up and the people went mad, Trenua would blame the damaged chalice on the Duke's delegation and then, with righteous indignation, annihilate them. He was undoubtedly waiting for the opportune moment. That's why the spirit had sought out Letitia in the dead of night. With her permission, Owen could obliterate that villain in an instant. But Letitia hesitated. She remembered the torment and abuse she had suffered at Trenua's hands. The fear still lingered, but she was no longer a helpless girl. The people she wanted to protect were in danger. Trenua had to be eliminated, but she refused the spirit's request, not out of fear or compassion, but because she didn't want Owen to sacrifice himself. A fight between wings meant either betrayal or defiance. If the saint discovered it, what would become of Noel, who was still at her side. Could she stand by and watch another tragedy unfold? No. For their happiness, she decided to eliminate Trenua herself. But she needed help. After instructing the spirit to carry out a task, she snuggled back into her husband's arms. She had no idea that her secret delight had been witnessed by the man who was only pretending to sleep. Was this a dream or a test from the heavens? Dietrian almost lost his composure. So, when Enoch awoke, he found the prince looking utterly exhausted. He even moved an entire regiment's worth of belongings by himself. Could he have been kicked out by the princess in the middle of the night? While everyone was busy preparing to set off again, Letitia wasn't idle. The task she'd given the elves last night had been successfully completed. The city lord had agreed to provide full assistance and was even bringing his guards to accompany the envoy. Looking at the city lord's haggard yet determined expression, Letitia thought there might actually be a pleasant surprise. Now was the time to witness a miracle. She placed her hand into the fountain and prayed sincerely. Please grant me strength, I beg you. With this thought, she focused her will. Droplets of water seemed to gain sentience. Look at me. Give us a chance to show our power, they seemed to cry. The water droplets clamored for her attention. Letitia felt a sensation she'd never experienced before. If you truly wish to follow me, she declared, then show me your will. As soon as she spoke, the water in the fountain began to glow. Then the scene from the beginning unfolded. The lake was drained in an instant. Without water, the citizens panicked. They swarmed into the city lord's manor. No one could believe it. The city lord and his son had fled. The fountain, which had protected them for centuries, their lifeblood, was gone. Every time the girl's fever spiked to 90 degrees, her power grew stronger. She could even see her mother, the goddess. It turned out that after the envoy continued their journey, Letitia, remaining behind, used her divine power to drain the city's water. But her body immediately collapsed. Although she enjoyed riding with her husband, the churning in her stomach made her feel like she was dying. She thought leaning against her husband would help, but the sounds around her faded and her vision blurred. Suddenly, long, jet black hair floated before her eyes. It's been a while, Letitia. It was the goddess Dinjuk, Letitia's true mother. More than curious about the goddess's appearance, Letitia wanted to know what was wrong with her. Her body suddenly felt awful, like she'd swallowed something terrible. She worried something was seriously wrong, but she never imagined her power had simply grown stronger. After all, she had just awakened her water powers, and her body was still adapting. It was a sign that her power wasn't yet strong enough. Moreover, the countless water droplets she'd absorbed were desperately drawing on her strength. The farther from Losantin Castle she traveled, the more power they drained. That's why she felt so exhausted. But once the water returned to its source, her strength would not only be restored immediately, but would also grow even stronger. Even now, her power was constantly changing. That's why the goddess could appear at such a joyous moment. She intended to give Letitia a divine jade as a blessing. However, once given, the goddess would fall into a deep sleep again. But she did it anyway, pressing her forehead against her daughter's. Please remember to confirm the dream of the Gilead family, she whispered. With those words, Letitia finally opened her eyes, her body suddenly filled with energy. She knew it was the goddess's help. But what did the dream of the Gilead family mean? Lost in thought, a waft of foot odor reached her. It was an all-too-familiar scent. Looking up, she saw, as expected, that weasel Temua. With his usual wicked grin, he asked Letitia if she'd missed him. It made her sick. Letitia remembered how her mother would always beat him senseless and then ask if he felt anything. He hadn't understood then, but to avoid further beatings, he'd lied and said he felt some kind of power. But it was that lie that condemned him to hell. Her mother, in a fit of what seemed like madness, handed him over to Temua, that brutal creature. It wasn't just the daily torment of his body. It was the relentless erosion of his spirit. Fear had become his constant companion. Even Dietrician's gentle nature was perceived as venomous. He couldn't open his heart, not even to Dietrician in his final moments. The misery of his past life could be laid squarely at Tenua's feet. That bone-deep terror hadn't faded, not even when they departed from the palace kingdom. But now, things are different. He looked at the envoy, battling monstrous beasts alongside Zheng, and saw the people he had sworn to protect with his life. His gaze was resolute, devoid of fear. This time, he would personally deal with this treacherous schemer. The waist of a princess, revealing her true strength for the first time, struck fear into the heart of the pathetically infatuated deviant. He couldn't even control his own divine power. The girl who once cowered in the shadows, trembling, was now fearless. After all, she was the true saintess, and the person before her was nothing but a fraud, clinging to a fraudulent mother. Faced with the impostor's provocation, Letitia offered a serene smile. "Tenua," she called, "is there something you need?" Tenua's eyes bulged in disbelief. "Are you talking to me? Just who do you think you are? Have you already forgotten what happened between us? After just a brief taste of happiness? How could I forget those unforgettable, agonizing memories? The more she dwelled on them, the more Letitia's resolve hardened. She would personally eliminate the one who had ruined her life, and who now sought to harm the people she truly cared for. With a resounding boom, a black whirlwind enveloped them both. It was the full force of Tenua's power, yet he couldn't control a shred of it, and the girl he had once trampled beneath his feet now stood firm like a god. But Letitia hadn't anticipated the sheer strength of Tenua's wicked power. If it seeped into the nearby monsters, it would spell disaster for the envoy. There was no time to lose, but it didn't matter. Wearing the Elisir bracelet, she reached out. The moment she touched Tenua, a blinding golden light erupted. An indescribable terror seized Tenua, making him tremble. He felt his power draining away. He grabbed the girl in a frenzy. "What have you done to me?" Suddenly, he coughed up a mouthful of blood. "You'd best show me some respect." Letitia's low voice seemed to strike Tenua's very soul. Under an invisible pressure, his knees buckled, forcing him to the ground. In that moment, he finally realized he was truly going to die. "Please, I beg you. I don't want to die," he pleaded, as pathetically as a dog, just as Letitia once had. She too had begged relentlessly, just to live another day. Letitia returned his pleas with a refusal. "This place will be your grave." As soon as she spoke, the black whirlwind dissipated. Owen, in the midst of battling monsters, stared in shock for 3 full seconds. Dietrich Ian finally reached his beloved's side. He had been frantically trying to reach her through the whirlwind after the deafening boom, but couldn't get close. "What happened?" Letitia calmly explained how Tenua had stolen the Holy Grail. Owen corroborated her story, and the city's lord himself confirmed it. Tenua wanted to argue, but he couldn't make sound. He could only glare. Watching them put on this performance, not only blaming him for damaging the Holy Grail, but also handing him over to the saintess for judgment, he flew into a rage. With all his might, he screamed lies. The Holy Grail was already broken. He only took what was useless anyway. How could he have put Los Santon in danger? He had never felt so wronged in his life. He then pointed the finger at the city lord. "Tell me, what is the real truth?" The city lord was suddenly struck speechless with guilt. But just as one crisis subsided, another arose. The townspeople came chasing after them on horseback. She raised her hand, suppressing her divine power, and caused the city's water to vanish in an instant. It turned out she was the true saintess. Tenuaman, realizing the truth, was stunned. But before he could speak, he was cut down on the spot by a human. Everyone was in disbelief. The winged one, who could tear them limb from limb with the slightest twitch of his toe. How could he die so easily? When the townspeople chased them out of the desert, everyone learned the truth. All the water in Los Santon had vanished. "Impossible. This is absolutely impossible," Tenuaman shouted in denial. Because even the saintess couldn't do something like this. What if someone stole the sacred steel? The old extra's words sparked a commotion. Someone shouted, claiming to have seen the city lord steal the sacred steel. The city lord instantly became the target of everyone's accusations. But this was the perfect opportunity. Last night, Owen had instructed him to push the blame onto Tenuaman at the right moment. And now was the right moment. He, the winged one, now kneeling on the ground like a dog, not only revealed that his son had been gravely injured, but also pushed the blame for the damaged and vanished Holy Grail onto Tenuaman. It was Tenuaman who angered the goddess. That's why Los Santon lost its water. As he raised his sword, Tenuaman's face was full of disdain. What could a mere human do to him? But in the last second before his death, he realized his divine power wouldn't activate. Looking at the unremarkable black gem in the young girl's hand, the Elisir possessed by the saintess, he understood everything. but he could only disappear forever, taking the secret with him. Those who hadn't fully believed the city lord, upon seeing the Holy Grail recovered from Tenyumen's body, were filled with both anger and conviction. But what was worse, the golden Holy Grail had turned a dull, greenish-gray. The people were furious. They swarmed, picking up stones and throwing them at the dead man. Letitia felt a mix of emotions, but relief was foremost among them, because her beloved was safe. Facing her husband's worried embrace, she no longer avoided him, no longer hid the affection in her eyes. She even embraced him in return, confessing the fear and worry she had endured under Tenyumen's torment. This was the first time she had openly expressed her feelings. Daitrai was speechless. The invisible wall between them seemed to be disappearing. But their tender moment was interrupted only seconds later when his subordinates called him away to discuss their next course of action. The people's anger continued to simmer. Letitia silently reached for the Holy Grail lying on the ground. If only I could change things, she thought. Her wish was quickly granted. The moment she picked up the Holy Grail, it not only returned to its original brilliance, but shone even brighter than before. Overjoyed, she whispered praises to the Illuser in her hand. Thankfully, no one noticed, because in terms of both status and power, she was no match for her mother right now. Should I just drop it and pretend I didn't see anything? She wondered. But as she looked up, she saw the city lord, his face filled with shock and his words tumbling out incoherently. Oh no, can he keep my secret? My divine destiny has been discovered. Mother will definitely kill me. Fortunately, the second wing stepped in front of her, leading the man who had discovered her destiny to the edge of a cliff. Speak. Any last words? Owen knew full well that only the dead could keep secrets forever. After all, currently, only he and Noah were a match for Letitia's wing. Needless to say, Josefina, a 30-year-old spinster, and Letitia would definitely be treated as imposters at the palace. Even if the other party is innocent and kind, for the sake of his master's safety. He drew his cocoon without hesitation. But Emperor Qingzu wasn't a fool. The suddenly disappearing water source, the powerless Temua, and the instantly restored Holy Grail. Piece by piece, incident by incident, he guessed that Letitia was the saint, and Lord Owen was Letitia's protector. My heavens, so Josefina really is the false saint. This sentence temporarily saved his life. Actually, it wasn't entirely to save his own skin, because every time he asked the saint for help, the saint would always say it was a monster that it had absorbed the dragon's power, and that's why it came to Los Santon to terrorize the people. But long ago, the duchy's dragon clearly suppressed May to protect the people. Although he was suspicious, he didn't dare to believe his own speculation, until the Holy Cup was inexplicably damaged. He always felt it couldn't be unrelated to the saint. Moreover, before becoming the city lord, he had always been by the saint's side and knew that woman's character very well. Even calling her a viper felt like an insult to vipers. Perhaps the true saint was someone else entirely. He hadn't realized he'd inadvertently made a prophecy, but he wasn't saying these things out of fear of death. After all, only by sparing his life could he help. What was it? This sentence happened to strike a chord with Owen. Because Los Santon was the only route to the Imperial Kingdom, when war broke out, it might be able to influence the outcome of the war. So he decided to spare the city lord's life. And to be safe, he left a wind spirit by the city lord's side to keep watch. He also returned the restored Holy Grail. Looking at the brilliant light at this moment, the city lord's inner worker couldn't help but stir. He rushed towards the crowd and raised the Holy Grail, announcing the news of its restoration. It must be because I killed Nuya that I moved the goddess. This reason was quite perfect, but Owen had to leave, not only to return Temua and report back, but also to prepare for his master's eventual return to the Empire. Letitia was terribly reluctant, but could only watch that busy figure from afar. After all, one was the spinster's most cherished protector, and the other was her most hated daughter. They couldn't appear too close in public. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the air. Owen's farewell voice was carried on the wind. Lady Letitia, don't worry. Noel and I will resolve all your difficulties for you. Until we meet again, please be happy. His voice was filled with concern. She felt it. From afar, she offered him a smile. Remember to propose to Noel, okay? Although she was very reluctant to part with Owen, Parting was for a better reunion. That day, the people of Los Santon cheered until midnight. But in a place unknown to anyone, a black hole appeared. A wooden box containing someone's cold body was opened. The man in black cursed and grumbled. He sprinkled 2 more handfuls of pepper. The scourge who had been stabbed 3 times to treat his illness was actually still alive. Not far away, a white dove in a tree witnessed everything. This fellow was finally going to break the imperial law. She embraced her husband. She yearned for that warm kiss, wanting to take things further with her beloved. She had finally waited for her husband to take the initiative. But her husband stopped halfway. "It's late. Let's sleep." Letitia felt wronged and wanted to know why. But seeing her husband turn away and no longer look at her, she still said a dejected, "Okay. He still loves me, right?" Hysterian actually had the same thoughts as his wife. But what then? What should happen after? He had clearly said before that it was all an act. He was afraid that after impulse took over, he would scare his wife away. Letitia found herself unable to let go, captivated by this excessive tenderness. She drew her husband's hand to her waist. This time, she was certain he wouldn't ignore her feelings. Yet, the story was unfolding differently from her past life. Without Manhwa as an obstacle, the envoy quickly reached the palace city. The second knight commander, who should have hated him, and Yuli's sister, Enoch, were unexpectedly deferential. And his future mother-in-law, who should have been the royal city, was hidden in a baggage cart, having secretly come to the border town. Even more alarming, as soon as he laid down on the 2-meter-wide bed, someone started throwing stones at his window. He thought it was some kind of terrorist, but it turned out to be his future mother-in-law, the king's consort, Lady Manhwa. The first time he saw this elegant woman was in a portrait in the royal palace in his past life. Tragically, she had lost her mind after Yulios's death. But if it weren't for him, perhaps Yulios wouldn't have died. Back then, his mother-in-law always mistook others for her deceased son. He couldn't bear to imagine what would happen if she mistook him for Yulios. He feared he would crumble under the guilt, so he always avoided everyone. But his fears were realized. When they happened to meet while he was taking a walk on this snowy day, his mother-in-law was barefoot, wearing only a thin gauze dress. The moment she saw him, she recognized him as Yulios. "I knew you would come back," she sobbed, collapsing in the snow. "You promised me you would come back. That's why I let you go to the Empire with peace of mind." She laughed and cried like a child. Letitia couldn't respond, only draping his coat over her and helping her into his warm, padded boots. Held by her, he heard her call out Yulios over and over. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." They crouched in the snow, weeping for a long time. Hearing his mother-in-law softly calling him from downstairs, referring to him as child, he wondered if she was mistaking him for Yulios again. He started to go outside to check on her, but she called out, "Someone might see you. Jump from the window." He was stunned. This was the 2nd floor, but the next moment, he landed lightly as if carried by the wind. This time, she didn't call him Yulios, but he automatically responded as if she had. "I promised you, I would come back." The murderer, hunted by the Empire, had just risked his life to save 2 strangers. He couldn't believe it. Someone who had been dead for 10 days was alive. His dark golden hair was gripped tightly. But Letitia couldn't summon any of her goddess's power. He was willing to trade his life for the safety of the 2 beside him. But then his mother-in-law cried out, "Letitia, my child." How did she know his name? In his past life, she had always mistaken him for Yulios. So when she called him child, he automatically assumed the role of her son. Then, to his surprise, she began showing him off to everyone. "Isn't my child beautiful? Look, he even changed my shoes for me." A nearby stall owner noticed Letitia's bare feet and quickly ushered him to sit down before hurrying home to fetch him some shoes. Letitia felt uneasy. If the stall owner knew he was the saintess's son, he doubted they would be so kind. He didn't want to deceive anyone and was about to reveal his true identity when a hand gripped his tightly. "Don't leave me. Be a good child. Stay with your mother." Her eyes, filled with love, were exactly like the ones in the portrait, the way she looked at her son. This love should have belonged to the deceased Yulios. How could he pretend to be his brother? He called out to Lady Manhwa, guilt twisting in his gut. I've come back from the future, and someone died because of me." He always prayed for a chance to save that person. Even if it means being scorned, it doesn't matter. But that person believed everything I said. Everyone cherished him. This was the first time he felt what happiness truly meant. I can't tarnish his name. I have to tell the truth now. But then, Lady Manhwa had a dream about him. In the dream, he had a son and a daughter with his beloved, and they lived happily ever after. He thought the dream referred to Julius. Unexpectedly, Lady Manhwa took out a red ribbon. She gathered his raven-black hair, tying it back. As she tied the ribbon, she murmured, "If you were my daughter, I wouldn't let you get sick or sad. But it's all right. I'm truly your mother now." The red ribbon, the word daughter, unease pricked at him. Who did Lady Manhwa think he was? The moment he looked back at Lady Manhwa, the goddess's words echoed in his mind. "You must remember to confirm the dreams of the Gilead family." It was said that this family could foresee the future through dreams. Could Lady Manhwa have seen his future? He found it hard to believe, but he needed to be sure. "Do you know the Gileads?" he asked. Lady Manhwa, her face bright and cheerful, replied, "Of course." But before he could continue, monsters attacked the city. Around a corner, Letitia sensed a familiar presence. "Long time no see," a voice hissed. Letitia's eyes widened. It was the supposedly dead Temua. Before he could understand what was happening, he instinctively knew Temua was up to no good. With a deafening crash, a beam fell from the ceiling. He shielded Lady Manhwa just in time. Warm blood trickled down his forehead, but he reassured Lady Manhwa, "Don't worry." Lady Manhwa cried out, "My child, my child." Her cries enraged Temua. "But you're not afraid anymore? It's because you've been corrupted by the duchy. No matter how much the Duke loves you, you can't forget our past." Temua had lost all reason. Meanwhile, Barnatia was bickering with a friend. Suddenly, a townsperson rushed up to them, alerting them to the attack. Thankfully, Lady Manhwa was unharmed, but Letitia was trapped beneath the rubble. The goddess's third wing awakened. It incinerated the imposter wing in a flash of fire, leaving Temua begging for mercy. Barnatia watched in horror as the princess was beaten black and blue. He shouted her name, but she didn't respond. Julius held back Temua's attack, while Barnatia scooped up the princess and ran. With Owen gone, he couldn't lose her too. A sharp cry pierced the air. Julius was no match for Temua. He had to entrust the princess to someone else. After making sure she was safe, he heard Temua boasting, "You insects can't defeat me. The one who granted me power is the true victor." He scoffed. "A madwoman who slanders her own daughter as a murderer? You're not worthy." His words infuriated Temua. Temua lunged, a sword aimed at his heart. He kicked Temua in the gut, then raised his arm to block another blow. His coat was ripped to shreds. "I can't die here," he thought. He hadn't confirmed the princess's safety, but it was no use. Even if Temua was a false wing, he was still no match for her power. He was just an ordinary man. When the arrow pierced his flesh, he couldn't even fight back. Temua, the manipulative fiend, taunted him with Letitia's name, threatening to torment the princess he swore to protect. He gripped the sword embedded in his side, his resolve hardening. Clinging to the belief that he had to protect the princess, he suddenly understood what Owen meant by having the resolve to die. So that's what he meant. He smiled. Temua thought he'd gone mad. But how could that be? He was suddenly enveloped in white flames. In an instant, he was fully restored. But he wouldn't give Temua another chance to revive. With a whoosh, Kriya was engulfed by the evolutionary flames, howling in agony. The more pitiful his cries, the more excited Baneshaw became. "Ha ha, I won't let you die so easily." Compared to his victory, however, Letitia was barely clinging to life. The two healers hadn't even figured out a solution before they were knocked out. It was Sig, who had been silently guarding Letitia all along. He had now returned to his adult form, and the mage who had formed a contract with him had transformed from dust into a cat. It turned out that everything, from Tenua's resurrection to awakening the third wing and defeating him, had been part of his plan. But this plan hadn't accounted for Letitia's safety. He whispered an apology. "You don't have to shoulder everything alone anymore, because there are many who love Letitia. It's time to wake up now." As Letitia's wounds vanished, the cat's body began to dissipate. When Letitia opened her eyes, she could only make out the blurry figure of a small child. "Next time we meet, I will bestow upon you an even greater power." The child's gentle voice echoed in her ears. A warmth spread through her heart. She thought about how she would have to apologize properly next time they met. But the image of the child was fading. She struggled to remember when suddenly a ball of white flame darted out and landed on her. She yelped, "Hot, hot!" But when she poked it, she realized how incredibly cute it was. He is the true daughter of the goddess. she thought, yet she can only secretly use her powerful strength. With a quiet begun by my command, she subdued a monster capable of toppling a city. Letitia never imagined that the small white flame could possess such power. At first, she thought there was a fire, but it turned out to be a small spirit. The sound of war drums drifted in from outside. She remembered that the entire town was surrounded by monsters. The Tyrion must be in danger. She immediately got out of bed to go help, but Termia, she knew that he wouldn't let her go easily. But from Yuri, she learned that he was being mercilessly tormented by Bane Shah, unable to even die, let alone fight back. My God, she was both shocked and disbelieving. But Yuri had no reason to lie to her. She could go help the Tyrion without worry. Yet, the moment she appeared before her husband, he scooped her up and tried to throw her back into the city. The monsters today were unusual. Not only were they relentless, wave after wave, but even ancient monsters, slumbering for millennia in the desert, had emerged. The Tyrion had never seen anything like it. He immediately ordered those who couldn't wield a sword back to the city. Those 6 knights remained, all capable warriors. They might all perish this day, but he had a city behind him. He had Letitia. Just as he silently prayed that Letitia wouldn't appear, a sudden gust of wind swept through the sky. The wind carried a familiar, captivating scent. But how could the owner of that scent be here? As he thought this, his wife threw herself into his arms. The city gates were already closed. How had she appeared out of thin air? Though he had many questions, his wife's safety was paramount. He lifted her up, intending to carry her back to the city, but then he saw the blood staining her clothes. Had she been wounded by the monsters? Panic and guilt seized him. He cursed himself for not having defeated all the monsters earlier. She still naively prayed for her wife's safety. Even though her wife said she was fine, Letitia still didn't believe her. Such a serious injury. How could it heal so quickly? Unexpectedly, her wife took off her clothes, revealing smooth, white skin with no sign of injury. Letitia turned her head away, squeezing her eyes shut, unable to look. But she still insisted her wife go back. Because I'd rather be the one in danger than see you hurt again. These words sent a shiver of fear down Letitia's spine. She remembered her past life. Her husband had said those same words and never returned. Please, give me a chance to protect you, she pleaded. She threw herself into her husband's arms, terrified of being pushed away. Just as everyone was absorbing this dramatic scene, a swamp suddenly appeared in the desert. The enormous monster struggled for a long time, but could only watch helplessly as it sank deeper. Everyone was stunned. Only Letitia whispered, "I command you, retreat at once, and never set foot on this land again." The monster whimpered in terror, filled with unspeakable regret. He remembered a short time ago, a man in black had released him from a seal. That man had filled him with a deep, primal fear. It was this man who had sent him here to cause chaos. He hadn't even dared to resist, just ran. But the woman before him wielded the evolution flame. It was a power no monster dared ignore. He finally realized his foolishness, lowering his already humbled head, begging for mercy. Fortunately, the woman didn't attack him. Stizen urged him to quickly leave the swamp. The moment the desert returned, he turned tail and fled without a second thought. Everyone cheered for the victory. It must be a miracle created by the dragon, they cried. But only Dietrich knew the truth. This had nothing to do with the dragon. Letitia, he said, his voice low, did you just drive away Valinos? Was that your power? Questioned like this by her beloved, Letitia couldn't lie. Yes, she admitted, I used the goddess's power to intimidate Valinos. To her surprise, her husband's face paled. Could he not accept her power? She feared he would be repulsed, but instead, he held her tightly. The saintess doesn't know about this, does she? The goddess had appeared, but only left behind the cryptic words, Gilead's dream. What could it mean? Letitia planned to inquire further once they reached the duchy. Unexpectedly, the seemingly senile duchess mentioned having a dream. And after Letitia had scared off the giant scorpion, someone had delivered a children's book titled The 12 Families of the First Duchy, Gilead. Letitia froze. She didn't even hear Vanessa sharing the momentous news of her awakening. A chill ran through her hands. Her husband was practically frantic with worry. She hadn't wanted him to know too much, but now she had to ask. Your Highness, she began, do you know what Gilead is? Through her husband's explanation, she learned that there was once a separate duchy possessing immense power. The 12 families were chosen by the dragon, and Gilead could foresee the future through dreams. Unfortunately, that power had vanished, but the goddess wouldn't have mentioned Gilead's dream without reason. Hearing that the Duchess wanted to read her the children's book, Letitia decided to seek answers from her. She had a strong premonition that the Duchess was not an ordinary person. Just as she suspected, the Duchess was a member of the Gilead family. Although she currently possessed the mind of a young child, she said, "I know you'll be all right, because in my dream, I saw you living happily for a very long time." Letitia was both astonished and confused. Hadn't Gilead's power disappeared? But that power has returned. Her heart pounded in her chest. Could she really escape the curse? Could her dreams actually come true? Joy and excitement coursed through her veins. The Duchess gently wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. "Child," she said softly, "would you like your mother to read you a story?" Saying this, she pulled him towards the bed. He was held in his grandmother's arms. Occasionally, she murmured a few broken phrases to the child. "Is this a miracle you're reading about?" "Yes, you're reading it correctly." Their back-and-forth conversation resembled the way one might read a fairy tale to little Julius. "Mother, what does miracle mean?" The lady patiently explained. "Your birth was a miracle for Mother." That was the first time he felt the joy of being a mother. But this beautiful moment didn't last long. The Saintess requested the second prince to represent them in the duchy. Although her husband constantly reassured her that everything would be all right, she had a persistent sense of foreboding, as if something bad was about to happen. Then, when her older son said he had seen the future, that Dietrian would be humiliated by the Saintess, she chose not to believe him. After all, Gilead's power had already disappeared. It was just an ordinary dream. Unexpectedly, her older son stubbornly insisted on going in his brother's place. "Let me go to the Empire. That's the only way everyone will survive. Besides, I've been there several times, and I'm experienced. As long as I appease the Saintess, everything will be fine." But Dietrian is different. How could a 16-year-old boy endure the Saintess's humiliation? "Mother, if you don't believe the dream, please believe me. I will definitely come back." The lady chose to believe her son. She believed he would definitely return. However, what awaited her was the news of her son's death. She wept, regretting not having believed the dream. So she allowed herself to drift, lost in dreams of reuniting with her son. But every time she came back to reality, the pain would tear her apart. It wasn't until her son's ashes were delivered, just now, that she suddenly realized her son hadn't broken his promise. He truly had returned. The lady stroked the box, sitting by the moonlit window, her heart filled with an unspeakable bitterness. Her son had known all along how he would return. What must he have been feeling when he spoke those words? She softly cursed, "You rascal," then looked at the child in the bed, guarded by his uncle's spirit. "Well, Mother, what do you think of him? Isn't he absolutely adorable? He foresaw everyone's future, yet he couldn't save himself, because only through his death could his younger brother become the crown prince, and his sister-in-law be reborn after death. Mother, please believe me. I will definitely come back." And so, Julius arrived at the Empire, perhaps embracing the inevitability of his death. This past month hadn't been as agonizing as before. Even when the priests mocked him as a dog of the gods, he could simply laugh it off. But he couldn't ignore the little servant girl. She was his younger brother's future wife. He recognized her the moment he saw her. He felt both relief and despair. Relief because he had finally met the person he had waited for so many years. But despair because his own death was a foregone conclusion. Although the little servant girl's company brought solace to his remaining days, he also felt guilty. Was it right to drag Letitia into his fate? But remembering how lonely Letitia's death had been in this life, he became even more resolute in his decision. "Your Highness, will we meet again?" At their parting, he embraced Letitia. "Remember to meet me again with a happy face." Although they would never meet again, Letitia would be happy. Everyone was happy, because today they were finally leaving this dreadful place. But only he knew that his own return home lay in the distant future. He wasn't the true saint at all. He deliberately provoked the Saintess. And finally, with a smile, departed forever. "I won. Everyone will be happy now. Every time the saintess thought back on it, she found it laughable. Who was happy? Not only had that guy's family become a complete mess, he had even married his daughter into it. The schemer grew more and more smug with each passing thought. He applied elaborate makeup, determined to prove his strength to everyone today. Ever since the goddess had cast down the two divine prisons, rumors had circulated that he was no longer capable. The best way to shatter those whispers was a blatant display of power through her wings. Noel, entrusted with this glorious task, was furious. Why were they stirring up trouble again? The divine jade from a few weeks ago had kept Josephine quiet for a while. That divine jade must have been something special. He had hoped to find answers from others. But before he could learn anything about its contents, a sharp, piercing pain shot through his heart. Lady Letitia, something was wrong. He could sense it clearly. Letitia was being trampled underfoot. Thankfully, the pain quickly subsided. He remembered Owen's words, "Stay calm, stay rational." But he was in no mood to work. So he went to the orphanage where his younger brother lived. He hadn't expected to be ordered back to work, but his irritation quickly vanished. He heard Owen's voice on the wind and joyfully wiped away his tears. Owen had become Lady Letitia's wing. He was no longer alone. Meanwhile, Dietrich had a dream. He saw his older brother. We finally meet again. Even after waking, he could still feel the warmth of his brother's hand. He often wondered, if the saint's wings could be constantly reborn, could his brother be as well? He was the first child chosen by the goddess, but his future had been ruined because of it. Everyone said being the first wing was an honor, but he didn't want it. The sight of that devil made him sick. "Please, father, please don't make me a wing." He was slapped hard. "How dare you disrespect the saint?" His father thought he'd lost his mind. He was locked up to reflect, and every day, 3 times, he was berated, told to admit his mistake, to pledge his loyalty. This went on for 3 years. "Father, I swear I will be loyal to Josephina." His father was overjoyed, oblivious to the coldness in his son's eyes. The night he gained his freedom, he burned down the saint's palace. He was just a boy, barely a teenager, yet he smiled with a chilling emptiness. "If Josephina wants the loyalty of the first wing, then kill me. Let the first wing be reborn." Seeing his beloved son like this, the emperor finally understood. But the empire's survival depended on the 9 ring stones, which prevented desertification and suppressed the monsters. They required the saint's regular infusion of energy to function. Without the saint, the empire would fall. The emperor dared not offend her. He made up an excuse and sent his son away. Thus, Tarlist vanished. No one knew the true reason behind the fire. To get revenge on Josephina, he mastered powerful magic and came to the temple to crash the royal wedding. He hadn't expected to see this. Noel simply raised his hand, and the water in the entire lake began to flow backward, instantly enveloping the venue in a thick mist. Anyone with common sense knew a wing's strength came from the saint's power. The rumors of Josephina's weakness were instantly dispelled. Josephina was ecstatic. Kale was furious. He couldn't believe that woman's power had grown so strong. But if he could just defeat Noel, he could humiliate the saint right here and now. If he could just see that devil's twisted expression, even Yoke's pain would be worth it. He hurled insults at Josephina right in front of Noel, but she just smiled even wider and even bowed to him. Not once, but twice. "You radiate an aura of pure joy. Are your ears malfunctioning? I insult your master, and you still bow to me? But when did you ever insult my master?" Noel was momentarily stunned. The man spoke the truth. Wei, for a moment, didn't react. He quickly started shouting, defending the impostor saintess. Even when facing the prince, he shouldn't utter such blatant truths. But his attempt to cover up only made it worse. The phrase blatant truths reached the prince's ears, clear as day. He was too ashamed to speak further. After all, this was the first time he'd met someone who dared to insult Josephine. He was a little too excited. Karl, however, reached out his hand, wanting to suppress him and, by extension, diminish the saintess's authority. Unexpectedly, his older sister suddenly arrived. "Do you intend to take painkillers while simultaneously defending the saintess?" Watching Noel seize the opportunity to escape, he desperately wanted to confront him and get some answers. But the stabbing pain in his body prevented him from standing. These few dung-colored pills were his only weapon against the saintess. His sister wept for his pain, but he could no longer feel any human emotion. The more he hated Josephine, the worse his condition became. But what was going on with Noel? A winged one would never forgive someone who insulted the saintess. But Noel, who had spared him, why didn't he feel the pain of the oath? It seemed he needed to investigate this man. Upon learning the truth, he was utterly bewildered. The saintess, who had been causing chaos in the empire, was an imposter. Noel was also getting fed up with him. Since that celebratory banquet a week ago, the prince kept trying to test his loyalty to Josephine. He had intended to keep avoiding him, but seeing Josephine internally injured by the prince's anger, he changed his mind. The enemy of his enemy was his friend. Even if the prince wasn't a winged one, he at least had a knack for infuriating people. If he dared to suspect Lady Letitia, he would kill him on the spot. But why was the prince's face so pale? And he kept breaking out in a cold sweat. "Your Highness, are you unwell?" His concern, however, was met with insults. He was called Josephine's lapdog. But regardless of who my master is, I would never ignore a sick person. Not only was he not angry at hearing someone speak ill of Josephine, he even wanted to help the person insulting his master. Carl stepped closer. "So you don't feel the pain of the oath? But why?" Such an obvious question. Noel suddenly had a suspicion. Although he hadn't experienced the pain of the oath himself, Owen had said it felt like being torn apart. Some even felt as if their heart was being crushed. He probed, "Why do you want to know how to get rid of the pain of the oath? You're not a winged one, after all." His eyes were fixed on the prince's pale face. It looked exactly like the pain of the oath. Of all the winged ones, he only didn't know the identity of the first. But now he had a guess. Someone who would rather die in pain than disobey Josephine. That meant this guy before him should have been Lady Letitia's winged one. "Yes, I'm that demon's first winged one." Although he had guessed it, Noel was still surprised. Because all this time, the duties of the first winged one had been carried out by the tirelessly toiling Owen. So every time he mentioned the first winged one, he got angry. He demanded the prince prove his identity. The prince, however, told him to ask Josephine. "Isn't that demon very fond of you?" Speaking of fondness, he felt a pang of guilt. This reaction was clearly abnormal. "Are you truly loyal to Josephine?" Faced with the prince's question, Noel decided to give a clear hint. "I have always followed the goddess's will, protecting the weak in this world, just as my only master helped me." But the prince didn't understand at all. He'd intended to leave it at that. But this guy was delivering a blow to the saintess's wings. He reached out, wanting to heal, only to be swatted away. Harkin sneered, calling his power filthy. Even with blood trickling from his lips, the man was infuriating. Noel didn't bother with further pleasantries. He grasped the prince's chin and began to chant. Carl tried to resist, but the power was strangely comforting. He recognized it as the goddess's, yet utterly unlike Josephine's murky, sickening version. Watching Noel's retreating figure, a question struck him. Noel had never actually said his master was Josephine, but he soon learned the truth. After several days of investigation, it became clear that Noel's beliefs aligned perfectly with Josephine's. It was said that on the day he swore his allegiance, someone was beaten bloody by Josephine. So he must have someone he had to protect, a reason to swear fealty to her. Carl quickly found that person, Letitia, the one Josephine had falsely accused of murder. She was the daughter of a god, yet powerless to save her own wings. Owen was dying. The power protecting him, his ribs, was rapidly fading. Letitia crumpled to the ground, overcome with grief. Every day since arriving in the kingdom had been filled with happiness. Because of her mother-in-law's prophecy, she no longer feared her own mother's wicked curse. She had even bravely proposed to her husband, promising to bear him 100 children. They were even going to have another wedding ceremony. But this happiness had made her forget there were others far away who needed her protection. "Someone, please help Owen," she pleaded helplessly. Suddenly, a 10-year-old child appeared before her. She was glad he was well now, but she didn't recognize him. "I am Sigmund, the beginning and the end." The name was familiar from fairy tales. The child was the kingdom's founder. The dragon had saved him long ago. But why was the dragon here now? The reason didn't matter. "Lord Sigmund, please help me." To a wing, the goddess's agent is their soul's master. The master's joy is the wing's joy. The master's sorrow is the wing's sorrow. She hadn't fully understood the significance of this bond before, but when she sensed Owen's distress, she realized how much he meant to her, like family. "So please, I beg you, save Owen." Sigmund smiled. "You will not lose your wings. You will save them." It sounded like a prophecy, just as your future will be filled with sunlight. Letitia was confused. She felt powerless. "Are you willing to try?" "Yes, I am." Sigmund took her hand. "If you encounter difficulties, do not worry. Just wait a little, and you will see the path forward." And so, Sigmund once again bore the weight of causality, returning Letitia's soul to the empire. Meanwhile, Noel was furious, practically homicidal. He looked at Owen, lying bloody before him, and felt utterly helpless. Healing Owen wouldn't be difficult, but Owen had told him to stop. It would only further enrage Josephine. Apparently, Josephine had flown into a rage the day Owen brought back Timia's body. It was clear she hadn't sensed Timia's death. The fact that the Saintess was losing her power was undeniable, and Owen was the only one who knew. As Josephine advanced, pen in hand, he knew he was as good as dead. "Go on," she urged. "Plunge this dagger into your heart and prove your loyalty." He accepted the dagger, his loyalty, however, firmly placed with Letitia. He only needed to wait until Letitia had amassed enough power to overthrow everything. Let Josefina play at rebellion for a while. Josefina hadn't wanted to deal with the instability caused by the two vacant wing positions, which was why she had kept him alive this long. "So, Noel," he said, "just as Josefina instructed, heal me just enough to keep me breathing." But he was lying. He had long since accepted his impending sacrifice. He didn't want Noel to act rashly and endanger himself or Lady Letitia. He would, however, try to hold on for as long as possible. Unbeknownst to him, his mistress had already arrived in the Empire. Snow fell heavily. Outside the temple, a crowd had gathered. Letitia was among them. The wicked mother's false saintly facade could no longer be maintained. The true goddess's daughter had returned. In the name of the goddess's agent, she summoned a dense swarm of birds and beasts. The false saint would receive her just punishment because of the miracle wrought by the dragon. Lydie, her soul transmigrated, had returned to the Empire. This body, her vessel, was named Irina. But what were all these people waiting for? After some probing, she understood. Their families were missing. Though all were priests of the central temple, they had vanished without a trace a month prior. One priest claimed they had gone to escort a ducal envoy. The returning guards, however, stated that no priests had participated in the escort. Clinging to hope, the people turned to Owen. After all, he had been in charge of the escort. He was also the Saint's most loyal third wing. Yet, the news they received was of Owen being punished by the Saint. It was said he had been imprisoned in the dungeons. At first, no one suspected anything amiss. Then Noel, his face haggard, passed through the crowd. Whispers began to circulate, doubts slowly taking root. Who in their right mind would ask their own child to stab them in the heart? Some believed the news of the second wing's death had dealt a heavy blow to the Saint. Letitia knew the truth. Owen had endured it all for her. Looking at Noel, so utterly Chowdhury nearby, she swore she would avenge him. She would take everything from Josefina. Her first step towards revenge was to sow seeds of doubt among the people. It said the goddess's agent can sense the presence of her wings, she began, her voice carrying through the crowd. She should have known immediately about the wing's death. Remember the day the escort returned? There were celebrations, flowers strewn in their path. So why was the Saint so distraught afterward? Her words sparked a flurry of discussion, though fear quickly silenced them. But she knew it wouldn't be long before the rumors spread throughout the capital. Upon returning to Irina's residence, she immediately summoned the wind spirit, Bessie. She had intended to subdue her, but the unfamiliar woman carried a familiar aura. Recognizing Letitia, she reacted with a childlike mix of joy and sorrow. Letitia gave her two tasks: rescue Owen and bring Noel to meet her. Bessie vanished in a gust of wind, leaving the room in disarray. Letitia had meant to tidy up, but then she discovered a great secret. Written on a piece of paper in shimmering dust were symbols she had never seen before, yet she understood their meaning. "My only daughter," it read, "you will surely achieve your desires. Protect everyone." A woman's intuition told her this was a divine message from the goddess. It was as if on her wedding day, looking at her reflection in the glass, she finally understood. The dragon had chosen Irina for a reason. He quickly found the second divine jade from the wedding day. Every word was a warning to Josephine. Only death awaits you. But Josephine, unrepentant, blamed the duchy for the ominous jade. Remembering Dietrich's tragic end in his past life, his gaze hardened with resolve. This time, he thought, let me be Josephine's downfall. He opened the window. "In the name of the goddess's agent, I command you, answer my summons now." These monsters would be his weapons. Meanwhile, Owen, locked in the dungeon, felt life slipping away. His only regret was breaking his promise to Letitia. Yet, he was also grateful he hadn't proposed to Noel. His vision blurred. When he awoke, his wounds were meticulously bandaged, and a strange woman stood before him. Even her voice was unfamiliar. Yet, he recognized her instantly. "Are you Lady Letitia?" The true agent of the goddess was about to take her place. The charade of the false saintess, Josephine, was nearing its end. As monsters rampaged through the capital, a single question echoed through the panicked cries. Why can't the saintess control the monsters? Letitia used the chaos as cover to slip into the dungeon. Looking at the barely living man, she felt a surge of conflicting emotions, exasperation tinged with unbearable pity. Though he wore a different face, she recognized his familiar feathered wings. "Are you Lady Letitia?" he whispered. She didn't answer directly. "Don't move, Owen. Rest. That's an order." Every nerve in Owen's body tingled with a desperate hope. "Is it truly you, Lady Letitia?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I've come to rescue my second wing." But rescuing Owen meant Noel, his guard, would face Josephine's wrath. Letitia resolved to take both of them from the Empire. However, Owen's injuries were far graver than she anticipated, beyond even Noel's healing abilities. The strain of holding on a hope finally broke Noel. He was terrified of losing Owen. Letitia offered words of comfort, though her heart was heavy with doubt. The royal wing, Kalis, was her first thought. But after the disastrous encounter with Tinua's dark power, she couldn't risk another gamble. Owen's life was too precious. If she had to gamble, the first wing, Prince Carlisle, seemed a safer bet. Noel had mentioned Carlisle's deep hatred for Josephine. Furthermore, the clues found in Irina's room suggested that Irina was Carlisle's spy within the temple. He wouldn't question her identity. Unbeknownst to Letitia, Carlisle was preoccupied with her as well. He'd just begun to suspect Letitia's true identity when Irina delivered a small note. The writing was unintelligible. He took it to Josephine. He presented the note, feigning ignorance. Josephine's reaction confirmed his suspicions. "It's useless to you," she'd said dismissively, her tone far too certain. The note likely contained divine script. If Letitia could decipher it, he could expose Josephine's deception. Before he could leave for the duchy, the third wing incident occurred, leaving Noel distraught. One event after another led him to suspect that Noel and Owen served someone else. He decided to observe further. The uncontrolled monsters confirmed Josephine's fraudulent claim to the title of saintess. He watched the temple priest below beg for his life. Even if his sister wanted to save him, Carlisle would never help Josephine's lackey. The monster suddenly hesitated, looking around nervously as if afraid of something. It froze, completely still. Who was this goddess who had appeared so suddenly? He looked closer. He thought it was Irina. He was about to speak, to demand an explanation, when she looked up. In that single glance, he knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't Irina. He couldn't explain why. Time seemed to stop. The world narrowed to just the two of them. Without a word, he jumped from the window, but Irina was gone. He called out her name, frantic, his panic escalating with every guttural roar of the monsters. He ran wildly, searching desperately. One thought consumed him. If Irina was hurt, he couldn't live. He didn't even understand why he felt this way. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind him, "Your Highness, I have something to report." The words were like a cool breeze, calming yet unsettling. His sharp mind, usually so quick, was bewildered. "Who are you?" The false saint's true nature was about to be revealed, yet he continued down his destructive path. The reason for the monster's rampage was still unknown, and now news arrived of Owen's death. Looking at Owen's lifeless, staring eyes, the god's warning flashed in his mind. Only death awaits you. Josephine had completely lost her mind, but he would not give up. He would not surrender. Strands of blue-violet energy emanated from him. Behind him, several priests rose into the air, their faces contorted in agony. They didn't even have time to scream before their life force was drained away. He used human lives as the price to alter his predetermined fate. This was his secret, how he became a true saint, unbound by the laws of the kingdom. He remembered the night he became a true saint. The cloaked figure who made the pact with him had devoured the lives of an entire village. So why should he worry about losing anything? Whether it was the saint's power or the saint's position, he would have it all. But then, Owen's dead lips moved. "Your era is over. You will lose everything you hold dear. I just need to kill a few more," Josephine thought, now a full-fledged demon. That night, he slaughtered everyone in the prison. But he didn't notice the spectral figure that drifted from Owen's body, disappearing into the darkness. This was only the beginning of the divine calamity. Meanwhile, gossip about the false saint spread like wildfire, blanketing the capital. And Letitia, the true agent of the goddess, had finally found her fourth wing. She had intended to use Irina's identity, but Carl saw through the deception instantly. "You're not Irina." She tried to explain, but he grabbed her arm. Prince Carl knelt before her. "Why? Why only now?" Carl looked like a lost child, his face etched with anguish. She felt Josephine's divine power receding, the agonizing pain that had gripped her body finally fading. Where once there had been only hate, a flicker of warmth ignited within her. A torrent of complex emotions flooded her fractured heart. The one person who could save her soul had finally arrived. Then, this woman asked him to save someone, to keep her upcoming actions a secret from Owen and Noah. He found it ludicrous. Even if she asked for his life, no, even something more precious than his life, he would offer it to her without hesitation. And so, in the blink of an eye, Owen was pulled back from the brink of death. Noah was overjoyed, though he still couldn't stand Carl's sharp tongue. But all joking aside, Letitia quickly gave him a task, to take Owen immediately to the palace. He refused. He wouldn't leave, no matter the reason. Letitia had anticipated this. "But you and Owen must leave for the duchy immediately. This is an order." Unexpectedly, Noel would rather endure the pain of his oath than obey. "Even if it means death, I will die by your side." Letitia then fabricated an excuse, claiming a dragon would assist him, assuring his safe return to Sambao Town. Only then did Noel threaten the newly arrived wing, vowing to annihilate the entire royal family if anything happened to Letitia. Then, tearfully, he left with Owen. Carl was utterly bewildered by the power Letitia's commands held. He watched the blanket-draped figure standing by the window, his mind in turmoil. He sipped his tea, feigning composure, while secretly imagining what the woman truly looked like. If only he could catch a glimpse, even from afar. But the next moment, he was stunned. Who was this woman with raven-black hair and golden highlights? The false saintess, her identity on the verge of exposure, could no longer remain idle. She had planned to venture into the desert and vanquish monsters to salvage her reputation. But the monsters had all inexplicably vanished. The goddess's warning about the divine prison finally instilled a flicker of fear within her. But this also sparked an idea. Only he could interpret the divine prison's pronouncements within the empire. This meant his words were the goddess's words. There was no better way to regain his prestige. He rushed back to the divine palace, eager to begin. He was unaware that Letitia was fully aware of his plans and intentions. After seeing Noel and Owen off, Letitia could have returned to the duchy. But Carl's presence kept him from leaving. He only knew from his past life that Carl had committed suicide, but not the reason why. Now he understood. Carl was tormented by the pain of his oath. Although the immediate problem was resolved, he didn't know if the other wings were enduring similar suffering. But his more pressing concern was that he had been in the Empire for a day now. Dietrian wouldn't hold his funeral so quickly. The distant dragon also considered this. He had unconsciously reverted to his true form. He realized that Sieg was indeed unreliable. He looked at Carl, slightly embarrassed, but quickly turned to serious matters. He knew Josephine's character well. She wouldn't hesitate to slaughter everyone if it benefited her, but that wouldn't be good for her reputation. He guessed his mother would use the monsters, but because of his summoning, they had all disappeared. Therefore, his mother would likely exploit the divine prison. He believed the ritual would commence soon and wanted Carl to cause disruption during it. Carl was initially unsure, but the next day, the information he received from his informant mirrored Letitia's prediction. But the more capable Letitia proved to be, the more irritated he became. This divine palace should have belonged to Letitia, yet she hadn't enjoyed a single day of it. Noel would rather suffer the pain of breaking his oath than carry out his orders. He was beginning to understand, but he also felt it was dangerous. He had defied Josephine for years to live a free life, uncontrolled. Although Letitia was different, she was more dangerous than Josephine because he had no desire to defy her. He lamented his fate aloud, but inwardly resolved to help Letitia just this once. He found Josephine as she was preparing for the ritual. "I will participate as well," he declared, claiming it was the royal family's duty to share the responsibility and ask forgiveness from the goddess. If the false saintess refused, he would reveal his own transgressions to the public, such as his lack of reverence for the saintess, despite being the first wing. Josephine had no choice. He successfully secured his participation in the ritual. He had initially planned to go alone. However, Letitia would also be attending. At the ritual, Josephine would undoubtedly use the divine prison to frame the duchy. The destruction of the former Gong kingdom must not happen again. That's why he not only has to go, but he also has to make Josephine regret provoking him. Among the onlookers, Tao was worried and hesitant to agree. But that's not something you need to bother with. After all, you're not yet my reason. Hale smiled. Are you asking me to swear my loyalty to you? Then are you willing? Hale had already thought of 1,000 reasons to refuse. But before he could speak, Letitia said, "Then don't be my wings." He thought Letitia was playing tricks. He hadn't expected her to simply want him to be at ease. This was indeed the outcome he desired, but now he felt a pang of sadness. He had always thought that if he could escape his wretched fate, he would be willing to pay any price. He never thought he would have a choice. If it had been Letitia from the beginning, would he still have hated his destiny? But he had no time to think about it now. His mind was consumed with stopping Letitia from jumping into the fire. So he took Letitia's hand, knelt on one knee, and, as her wing, swore an oath to his master. "I am willing to become a divine calamity in your place." As the words of the oath left his lips, the divine power he had sealed within himself was restored, and it quickly merged with a powerful magic. The wicked, fake saint's true face was finally revealed. During this goddess ceremony, watched by the entire empire, she incited the people to wage war against the duchy. Delusional, she sought to use countless lives to twist her own fate. She blamed all her sins on having given birth to a demonic daughter. The moment the divine jade shone, she declared, "Let us obey the will of the goddess. Let us turn the Gong kingdom into hell." He never expected Letitia to be sitting among the people. She called out, "Mother," and walked towards her step by step. "Is this truly the goddess's will? You damn girl, why are you here?" Facing her mother's fury, she spoke with unwavering firmness. "Because I should be here." Pulling up her sleeve to reveal the illuser on her wrist, she declared herself the goddess's true agent. At the same time, the illuser emitted a brilliant holy light. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of shock. Why is it different from the saints? But some knew that the illuser could change its appearance with its owner. Josephine was stunned, but her sycophants were relentless. How could the goddess choose a demon? Unexpectedly, Letitia presented compelling evidence. "On my wedding day, the goddess sent down 2 divine messages. My dear daughter, the day you receive reverence and blessings is fast approaching." She recited the words verbatim. Josephine was cornered, but she refused to admit it. You're lying again." But Letitia then revealed the second divine message. "No matter how you try to twist my meaning, only death awaits you." This divine decree, like a nightmare, lingered. Josephine, terrified, refused to acknowledge the truth. Whispers of doubt rippled through the crowd. She forced herself to stand. She couldn't collapse. Otherwise, everything would truly be over. But her legs were weak. Suddenly, her 2 sycophants began to chatter. That family, who were once whipped and didn't even dare to beg for mercy, have no right to be clamoring here. You should use your whip to wake them up. Josephine's confidence surged back. She blamed the recent tragedies caused by the rampaging monsters on Letitia hiding in the empire. Perhaps she's being manipulated by the dragon. She had told so many lies that she even believed them herself. "I had hoped you would atone for your sins in the Gong Kingdom. I never thought you would commit the disgraceful act of colluding with a filthy dragon." Josephine shrieked, vowing to tear Letitia to shreds and hang her remains on the wall as a warning. Letitia was utterly disappointed in her mother. Not only did Josephine show no remorse, but she also slung mud at her. The wavering crowd actually believed her. After all, he was a notorious murderer, but he had anticipated this outcome. This was, after all, his mother's territory. But he wouldn't give up. Just as he was about to act, someone stomped, shattering the marble floor. Carl stepped in front of Letitia. "Are you satisfied now that you've seen the truth?" He spoke with a mixture of reproach and heartache. But Letitia was stubbornly determined, always prioritizing the safety of others above her own life. Since he couldn't change his master's mind, he decided to join her in her madness. Using his princely authority, he declared to the people that he was the secret of the 9 wings. But he couldn't accept this secret because Josephine was an imposter, a truly vile person, while Letitia, standing before him, was the true goddess's agent who could redeem him. The priest thought he'd gone mad, so he decided to embrace the madness fully. The great hall began to shake violently. People, terrified, scrambled for the exits, but the main doors were locked tight. Because the goddess's agent had always used the 9 wings wings as a metaphor for natural disasters. The temple where the 9 wings resided was supposed to be impervious to any calamity. The temple was considered the safest place in the world. No one could believe that an earthquake was now occurring within the temple itself. The wings, realizing the truth, were utterly distraught. The sole master they had waited 8 lifetimes for had only 6 months left to live. The vast temple crumbled into ruins in an instant. He then pursued the fleeing Josephine relentlessly. It turned out that Karl commanded the power of the earth. On this day of his ascension, he had intended to bury everyone within the temple, but Letitia stopped him. Although tree roots, like a giant net, supported the roof, a collapse would still result in immense devastation. Josephine was evil, that was undeniable, but there were many powerless commoners present. Letitia didn't want to become like her mother. Though he verbally disagreed, Karl still stopped the tremors. However, Josephine grew even more brazen. Not only did she slander the righteous dragon, but she also twisted the truth, claiming Letitia was the true villain. Just as the divine Jade had foretold, an evil force was threatening the empire. Karl couldn't bear it any longer. Suddenly, his sister collapsed before him. "Holy maiden," he said, "are you accusing the imperial family of treason?" Even though Josephine wasn't one for reason, this incident concerned the fate of the imperial family. He couldn't discern who the true goddess's agent was, but he trusted his younger brother. However, this was Josephine's territory. As the heir to the throne, he declared he would take Letitia with him. "If you don't want to start a war with the imperial family," he warned, "then let this matter end here." Josephine could only grit her teeth and let them leave. Although the princess's residence was heavily guarded, he was still determined to launch his attack. Even if it meant being struck by the reflective power of the dragon's protective barrier, he would take the girl's life this time. Meanwhile, Letitia felt a sharp pain in her chest. If it weren't for the dragon's life-enhancing magic, she wouldn't have survived. But what about next time? She feared it wouldn't be just coughing up blood. She was even more worried about how the wings would react once they learned the truth. Just as she was thinking this, she heard Karl and the princess knocking at her door. She tried to feign sleep and hide her condition, but Karl was even more stubborn than Noor, threatening to break down the door to check on her. She had no choice but to compose herself and peek out. But Karl still noticed her pale complexion. The princess, however, was overjoyed and immediately urged her brother to fetch a doctor. He wanted to make a deal with Letitia. There was a problem with the imperial regalia, and he proposed that Letitia help repair it, in exchange for the imperial family support. But then Letitia suddenly collapsed, coughing up blood. She clearly looked to be in agony, yet the doctor declared her perfectly healthy, suggesting she might be under a curse or some other supernatural affliction. He grabbed the incompetent physician and started berating him, but Karl unexpectedly intervened, his tone as gentle as if soothing a child. This made him uneasy. He remembered the last time Karl had worn such an expression. It was the night before the temple was burned to the ground, and now Karl wanted to throw everything into the flames. But Josephine might not be the culprit. "Do you really think so, sister?" A chill ran through Karl, but he understood perfectly. After all, Letitia was the light his younger brother had longed for. Yet, as the next emperor, he couldn't allow his brother to commit such an act. He had hoped people would believe in Letitia's true victory, and then everything would be resolved. But the path was destined to be turbulent. Even if Josephine wasn't the culprit, I don't want to see that demon gloating, seeing that he couldn't change his brother's resolve. He could only obey and charge out with the royal knights. Karl had cast a spell on the knight swords. The battle ended swiftly. Dawn broke, but the capital was plunged into darkness. Serpents of fear, riding the light, erupted from the earth, casting the temple, which people revered as sacred, into the abyss. No one could believe it. The empire, blessed by the goddess, the sacred swordsmanship of the great saintess, along with the people's pride and faith, were buried in the ruins. They cursed Karl, calling him a demon, condemning him to hell. He was satisfied, because now Letitia was the only one in the world guarding the demon's lifeline. And if necessary, he would personally offer her a demon-slaying sword. The false saintess, her true face revealed, finally went mad. She drained the life force from everyone, just to unleash a curse for her amusement. Because the more her daughter suffered, the more exhilarated she became. Especially after hearing that her daughter had just vomited 2 kilograms of blood. She even laughed through her tears as she fled. "Surprise! Your master will be dead within 6 months." Har was instantly enraged, but before he could act, Josephine drained all her own people dry. He was stunned by this bizarre maneuver. Watching surges of black power rise from the ground, he initially thought it was an earth spirit like himself. But he unexpectedly discovered a shocking secret. He could clearly sense that the powerful force that had been tormenting him didn't belong to Josephine. She was merely a puppet. The true mastermind behind that power was the one pulling the strings, using her to disrupt everyone's fate. And now, that person finally revealed their true face. Carl hesitated, afraid to approach. Although he was confident he could capture Josephine, the true culprit might escape. Furthermore, to lift Letitia's curse, he couldn't let the true culprit get away. But he hadn't anticipated the opponent's ability to teleport. Fortunately, he reacted quickly, slashing his palm and casting a tracking spell, layering it with 3 concealment spells. Now he could only pray he wouldn't be discovered. He had planned to deal with the remaining temple guards first, but unexpectedly, the person was Irina. He almost mistook her for Letitia. Irina was clearly panicked. She had been investigating her brother's disappearance, only to wake up and find the temple in ruins. Needless to say, I'm the one who brought down the temple. Carl also revealed the news of Irina's brother's death. Everyone who saw the divine prison that day met the same fate. Looking at her fighting back tears, he felt a strange emotion. Perhaps it was because Letitia had once worn that face. But he had to deal with all the temple guards now, so he ordered Irina to return to the countryside and lie low. Meanwhile, Letitia finally awoke. The first person she saw was Noel. Before she could recover from her surprise, she learned of the temple's collapse. It was all Carl's doing. Seeing the ruins with her own eyes, she still found it hard to believe. She had always perceived the temple as immensely vast, so vast it was suffocating. Even on the day she awakened the goddess's power and returned to the temple gates, she felt as if she could be swallowed whole at any moment. But now, the temple had actually fallen. Yet, she never imagined the reason behind it. So, Carl knew the truth about her spitting up blood. Even Noel and Owen knew. It turned out that during Josephine's infiltration, Noel had stumbled upon a fragmented, ancient magic circle. He didn't understand its purpose, but he copied it down nonetheless. He searched through countless ancient texts, but found no clues. It wasn't until he was on his way to the duchy that he remembered Carl. Perhaps Carl, with his powerful magic, could figure it out. That's why he had Bessie deliver it yesterday. Carl recognized it instantly, a curse written in an ancient language. Deciphering the target and the nature of the curse, however, would take time. He hadn't yet managed to do so when Letitia coughed up blood and collapsed. When the Grand Duke's elf brought back this news, the curse, coupled with the blood, it wasn't difficult for Carl to deduce who the victim was. "My mother cursed me," Letitia confirmed calmly. The calmer she remained, the more Noel worried. "Please, tell me the truth," he pleaded. The truth, that she had only months to live, was something Letitia couldn't bring herself to say. But there was no need to worry, she thought, because she had received a divine revelation from a goddess. As she reassured Noel, her body began to shimmer, dissolving into points of light. Before she could even finish relaying the content of the divine message, she vanished before Noel's eyes. Blessed by Belen, she had less than half a year to live, all thanks to her wicked mother's curse. When the Grand Duke's elf delivered the news, Noel laughed. He had just witnessed Letitia disappear before his very eyes. He'd thought his master would be safe upon returning to the duchy. He hadn't realized how naive he'd been. His laughter sent a shiver of fear down the princess's spine. After all, when the winged ones went mad, they were deadly. She had hoped Letitia would be able to manage things. The carriage was filled with a thick silence. Her greatest fear was Noel descending into a murderous rampage. No sooner had she thought this than the water beneath the earth boiled to 200 degrees. Even the blood-soaked trees seemed to sweat from the heat. She grabbed Noel. As the heir to the empire, she couldn't stand by and watch innocent people suffer. Noel, it turned out, had only one condition: that everyone believe Letitia's victory was real. Josephine's influence extended to the imperial palace, so he wanted the princess to act as a witness. He wanted no one to ever question Letitia again. With that declaration, he casually shattered a section of the palace wall, waved goodbye with a smile, and left the princess to the unenviable task of cleaning up the mess in the capital. If there's a next life, she thought, let me be Letitia's pet dog. Then I could live a life of leisure. But her current, singular goal was to have the empire revere Letitia as a saint. Just then, Carl arrived, clutching his bleeding hand, bringing news of Josephine. His tracking spell had been broken near the imperial palace, meaning Josephine must have gone there. After all, there was still one ring left in the palace. They had to stop Josephine from claiming it. But Carl had another objective: to meet with Josephine's eldest son. Meanwhile, Letitia awoke in her mother-in-law's enthusiastic embrace. But she couldn't shake her worry for the others. Was Carl safe from Josephine? Where was Owen? He had vanished so suddenly. Would Noelle panic and lose control? All her anxieties melted away the moment she saw Dietrich. Despite his bloodstained clothes, she rushed towards him, overjoyed. Dietrich's face darkened. Fortunately, the physician assured them she was unharmed. Still worried, he questioned the physician several more times behind Letitia's back. After all, he was truly terrified. Who could have imagined it? One moment, he was discussing the wedding with his ministers, and the next, his bride stopped breathing. Later, even her body vanished before his eyes. The thought that Letitia might never return was enough to make him crumble at any moment. He hadn't expected her to return at all, let alone covered in so much blood. How could his heart not ache? Yet, Letitia still chose to hide the truth from him, as always. To keep her by his side, he couldn't even voice the love he held at his heart. But now, he couldn't bear any longer. Letitia, I offer you my heart. Life together or death together. You can only choose one. The husband she'd known for 2 lifetimes finally confessed, yet fear drained the color from her face. He already knew the truth about the curse placed upon him by his mother and how to break it. If you don't kill me, you will die. Her husband knew everything, even her intention to bear the burden alone and die in silence. Dietrich understands everything, but I won't let that happen. Life together or death together. Choose one. Seeing her husband's strength and sincerity, Letitia's first instinct was to flee. But the thought of Dietrich dying for her, she wanted to say, "You are a monarch. You have responsibilities." But after hearing his words, she couldn't bring herself to say it. "If I die, you will live on in a world without me." Looking at the sorrow in Dietrich's eyes, she realized how cruel she was being. She had already experienced that desolate pain in her past life, and now she was about to inflict it on Dietrich. She felt terribly wrong. Her husband had given her 2 choices, and she hadn't answered. Because there was no choice to make. She had been reborn to save him. They would live together. She rushed back to his office, her expression serious and resolute. Dietrich had thought she would run. "But I won't let you go. Even if you die, I will immediately follow. No, I will die before you." He was childishly threatening her with his own life. Then, "Your Highness, do you love me? I don't know how many times I have to say it for you to believe me, but I truly love you. Then prove it by fulfilling my wish." The sudden mention of a wish left him momentarily stunned. Looking at Letitia's blushing face, understanding dawned. He remembered a certain night on the journey from the palace to Hayden. Letitia had expressed her desire to become a mother. "Didn't you say you would help me achieve it?" As Letitia spoke, both adults blushed crimson. She buried her face in her hands, thinking she must have gone mad. But the next moment, Dietrich was leaning in, his kiss fervent and passionate. Though they had shared many kisses before, this one felt entirely different. She finally believed his love was real. But just as the atmosphere intensified, a clattering sound shattered the moment. Papers and files scattered across the floor from his desk. Dietrich finally snapped. He couldn't understand why Letitia would do this in broad daylight. "Have you truly decided to live with me? When faced with difficulties in the future, will you rely on me instead of hiding things?" Even as Letitia clung to him and promised, he remained skeptical. "You're not thinking of running away, are you?" He hadn't expected Letitia to turn the tables on him. "You promised you wouldn't fall in love with me, yet you tricked me into showing affection in front of everyone. And today, you threatened me with your life several times." So, Letitia gave Dietrich 2 choices. "Either trust me, or take responsibility for your deception." "How do you want me to take responsibility?" Dietrich stammered, his face flushed. But Letitia was already lying on his desk. "Didn't you say bad dreams should be soothed with beautiful memories? I'm feeling hurt by your deception, so comfort me." In broad daylight, Dietrich started to make an excuse about locking the door, but she pulled him back. "Because I locked it when I first came in." Nice. He's a world-saving murderer, but no one wants to believe it. Even the princess, that lovesick sycophant, got slapped twice by Father. No matter how much he explained, Father believed Letitia's power was evil. He originally wanted to ask Letitia to repair the gesture to prove it, but unexpectedly, his head was yanked hard. Father cursed and slapped him again. This was so unusual. He finally realized something was wrong. Although Father was hot-tempered, he wouldn't be so unreasonable, like a beast that had lost its mind, and he wanted to lock him in the dungeon. The reason was that he had betrayed the empire, so he was no longer qualified to inherit the throne and was no longer a prince. It turned out Karl's judgment was correct. Father had indeed been controlled by Josephine. He clutched the necklace around his neck. It was a magical tool used to summon Karl, but he couldn't do that. After all, Karl's current condition was also very unstable. If these two powerhouses clashed now, he feared the palace would be reduced to ruins like some divine punishment before he could even sit on the throne he yearned for. He prostrated himself on the ground like he was worshipping a god. I was wrong. Her Highness Josephine is the empire's only saint. The more he spoke up for Letitia, the stronger Father's reaction became. His expression was practically identical to Josephine's. His probing proved correct. Father was willing to give him another chance. He proposed to send assassins in his own name, publicly claiming to eliminate Letitia personally. With Oscar-worthy acting, he successfully gained a sliver of trust from his corrupted father. The envoy the prince sent to the duchy quickly arrived. Letitia rode out of the city gates like a rocket. Before the horse even stopped, he impatiently jumped down. Watching this scene, Owen, who had been calm just moments before, couldn't stay composed. He hurriedly reached out and activated his wind power. Letitia was caught and landed safely. This was all punishment for Owen stabbing himself with a sword. But why did he happen to be here? It was all because he had a beautiful dream. That day, after doing that with Dietrich, he dreamed of a dragon carrying him in flight. The dragon also said he would soon receive an unparalleled surprise. Could the curse be lifted? He suddenly remembered the princess asking him to repair the gesture. He had a premonition that someone would come, but he didn't expect it to be Owen, who also brought news of Josephine hiding in the imperial palace. But regarding the issue of repairing the gesture, Letitia had a different opinion. When Karl became the fourth wing, only 4 of the Empire's 9 gesture possessed light. Therefore, he concluded that the gesture weren't damaged, but were gradually recovering. This way, the Empire's 9 wings would eventually be complete. Owen actually had a new discovery. Josephine's fourth wing was actually Silas. After all, when Letitia was bullied by the other wings, Silas never participated. Sometimes, he even seemed to show aversion to Josephine. Memories flashed through their minds. The two reached a consensus. They quickly returned to the duchy and organized a team, mainly consisting of Vanessa, Yuri, and the Enoch brothers. Before their departure, everyone prepared a lavish turkey dinner. However, one person had no appetite. The blonde was gloomy and didn't want to eat. Yuri thought he was crazy. Unexpectedly, he was trying to lose weight. It turned out that last night, while reading a fairy tale to Mrs. Mano, she had said he had a baby in his belly. While doubting himself, he was unaware that a baby really was on the way. After the wicked fake saint was driven away, the timid healer finally became assertive. With a short sword in hand, he cut off the man's 2-meter-long tongue. Compared to the rosy, love-struck atmosphere of the duchy, rumors about the true and false saintesses were swirling throughout the empire. The unsuspecting populace couldn't believe that Josephine, who had protected the empire for so many years, was a fake. But one man disagreed. He believed the Duchess might be the true saintess. Before he could finish his sentence, a burly man brutally attacked him, throwing him and his daughter into the snow. This was the handiwork of the fifth wing, the blonde-haired man. He would absolutely not tolerate any betrayal of Josephine. A pang of sympathy struck Kay. Using the excuse of needing fresh air, he stepped outside. Watching the little girl cry out for her father, he was reminded of his own awakening. A wave of sadness washed over him. He gently comforted the child. He then healed the unconscious man's injuries. "Always some small fry needing my attention," he muttered. "Have you betrayed Lord Lon's son?" he asked, stepping closer. He seemed to recall the burly man saying something during the beating. "Anyone who dares insult her holiness deserves to have their insolent tongue cut out." He liked the idea. He forced the man back inside, step by step. Soon, blood-curdling screams echoed from within. Meanwhile, Letitia's revenge squad arrived in the Empire. A journey that normally took a month, thanks to Karl's teleportation scroll, took them only 3 days. One moment they were in the heart of the desert. The next they were in the Empire's capital. The side effects, however, were severe. Bainisha, already half dead from the Emperor's execution, was nearly vomiting. "Don't you dare throw up near Lady Letitia." Owen snapped. He couldn't understand how someone with divine power could be so affected. "But Her Highness isn't doing much better," Bainisha retorted, indignant. Owen, it turned out, was a hypocrite. He immediately rushed to Letitia's side, fussing over her, and then declared he'd find Carl to refine the scroll. Before he could finish, Noel appeared, summoned by their telepathic link. The group headed to Carl's residence. Although Carl was absent due to the princess's situation, he had found a way to break the curse. You just need to kill Duke Dietrichian. Then you'll be saved. Noel didn't hesitate. Regardless of Letitia's feelings for Dietrichian, he would do anything to save his master. He hadn't anticipated the depth of Letitia's love for Dietrichian, a love so profound she couldn't live without him, a love that drove her to be reborn solely to save him. Leaving Letitia's room, Noel encountered Bainisha. Each wing currently served only one master, except for Bainisha, who served both the Duke and Letitia. If he could only choose one, who would it be, he asked. Bainisha found the question baffling. His two masters were essentially one and deeply in love. There was no need for such a pointless choice. Noel chuckled at his naivety, but he also knew Letitia's words were true. I've already experienced a world without Dietrichian. It was hell. I can only live if he lives. Letitia's words echoed in his mind. Noel completely abandoned the idea of harming Dietrichian. But Letitia's rebirth couldn't be kept secret. Upon learning the truth, he was filled with regret. The master he had served for 10 years was a fake. He saw the newspaper announcing the true master's return to the empire. Ironically, he was too ashamed to face her. After all, he had stood by idly each time Letitia was harmed, failing to recognize his true master. Beside him, the Fifth Wing continued to rant and rave, vowing to teach that crazy girl a lesson. Suddenly, inspiration struck. Perhaps it wasn't too late to prove himself. He seemed to have found his purpose. He abruptly pulled a dagger from the newspaper. "Blondie," he snarled, still ranting about ending Owen and Noel's lives. He raised his dagger with lightning speed and lunged. Only with Jia Ewing's death could the true Ewing be born. Zhe Liang found his throat in the blonde man's grip. He'd only managed to graze his opponent. Against the overwhelming power of a combat-type Ewing, he, a healing type, stood no chance. "Die!" the blonde man snarled. He felt a surge of resentment. The temple had swindled his father out of everything he owned, leaving him with a bone-deep hatred. His father, consumed by rage, collapsed onto his sickbed. It was then, ironically, that Zhe Liang awakened his healing powers. Though his father's life was saved, he loathed the fact that it was by the goddess's power. He couldn't accept his son becoming a Ewing. The day before the temple forcibly took him away, his father left home. He rode in a luxurious carriage, passing through cheering crowds. Yet he felt no joy. He hadn't received his only family member's blessing. It was said that a Ewing, upon meeting their master, would be overcome with joy, tears streaming down their face. But he only felt suffocated, especially the day news arrived of his father's death. His life plunged into darkness. His days were spent numbly obeying Josephine's every command, caring for nothing and no one. But then, that day, the divine power surged, and his world was utterly overturned. He understood then that Letitia was his true master. Was there truly no hope left? He longed to see Letitia one last time before he died. Just as despair threatened to consume him, two figures crashed through the window. It turned out that upon arriving in the Empire, Letitia and Owen had sought out the man Kai had saved. The sight of the supposedly dead man, looking so fierce, caused the man to faint on the spot. Fortunately, the healing power within him was still potent. It was the same power as the goddess Dainuit. Kai Lis was indeed Letitia's Ewing. To lure Kai to her, Letitia had leaked news of a meeting with the Emperor. But now, he had a terrible premonition. "Owen, bring the fifth Ewing to me at once. Bring Kai to my side." Just then, Vanessa and Noah burst through the window. "Long time no see, old Ranson." Before the blonde man could place Noah, Vanessa had him pinned to the ground, a combination of grappling and searing flames. Still, he remained defiant, spitting curses. He lay there, delusional, attempting to use his phasing ability to escape. But Noah yanked him back, resulting in a double dose of Vanessa's fiery assault. She looked like a deranged lunatic. Even Kai winced at the sight. Fortunately, Noah was used to it. Water swirling around his hand, he clamped it over the blonde man's throat. "How do you want to die?" The false saintess panicked. She couldn't afford to lose Kai Lis, her healing Ewing. But her son urged her to remain calm, suggesting that perhaps Kai had also become a traitor. Josephine couldn't calm down. Even if she lost all her other Ewing, she couldn't lose Kai with his healing abilities. She clung to her son, sobbing uncontrollably. Lycaler, with inexplicable confidence, declared, "As long as the remaining 3 Ewing protect us, not only Letitia and those traitors, but even the Transcendence Dragon that attacks the kingdom will be annihilated." His premonition, however, wasn't entirely wrong. Kai had become Letitia's speechless protector. He watched as Noah held his sword to the blonde man's throat. He expected a swift execution, but instead, Noah tried to persuade the blonde man to join Letitia's rebellion. "Our master is much better than that impostor." Kai was stunned. These 2 Ewing were so strange. He watched as the blonde man knelt, begging for forgiveness. But before Kai could intervene, the blonde man was dead. Vanessa was ruthless and verbose. Like Kai, he assumed Noah had been deceived. How could this be? Noah was furious. He'd planned to toy with the blonde man, to torture him. But now, Letitia's mission took precedence. He had to bring Kai back immediately. After what just happened, he felt a flicker of fondness for this woman. "You're not a battle-ready wing. How could you be so reckless, going head-to-head with that yellow-haired idiot? Come on, Lady Letitia is waiting for you." Kai refused. Guilt gnawed at him, making him unable to face her. Noel had reached out to him just now. He desperately wanted to take that hand. He remembered the day Noel first arrived at the temple, his small face stark white. There was none of the joy a wing should show upon meeting their master. That reaction mirrored his own, leaving a deep impression. He'd assumed Noel would become numb, just like him. But the outcome was completely different. Noel's smile now was so vibrant, radiating a tenacious life force. If he, too, pledged allegiance to Letitia, perhaps he could become the same. He unconsciously reached out, but a gust of cold wind snapped him back to reality. His true master had been right beside him for over a decade, yet he had never recognized her, never truly protected her. He rambled on and on. "Even if you drag me there by force, I won't marry her." He hadn't finished his tirade before Vanessa chopped him unconscious with a blow to the back of his head. Time was running out. When Kai woke up, he started fighting with Vanessa. But the moment he saw Letitia, he froze. He'd meant to explain that he hadn't come of his own free will. Yet, he couldn't utter a single word. Joy and excitement surged within him, a burning heat that overflowed into tears. Guilt and regret washed over him. The man who usually resorted to knives now clung to Letitia, acting like a spoiled child. He looked like a rain-soaked kitten. He explained the secrets of his healing abilities to Letitia, using the recently defeated Vanessa as a convenient test subject. Everyone was happy for Letitia, but he remained sullen. Letitia inquired and learned he'd been knocked unconscious by the wings. "Could you heal me?" he asked, blushing furiously. Letitia was stunned. "How can you be so adorable?" He was completely bewildered when he learned the truth. His wife was from the future. That explained why she'd been the first to notice Vanessa's leg. It explained why she was so certain he didn't love her, and why she kept saying such strange things. He asked the dragon to show him Letitia's past life, but he hadn't expected that Gilead's bloodline power had already awakened within him. He could see the past and future, just like his brother. The dream he'd had actually happened in a past life. To lift Letitia's curse, he had plunged a blade into his own chest, and that was the beginning of everything. The heartwarming reunion after the fifth wing returned was short-lived. They quickly learned of Letitia's curse and her shortened lifespan. Killing the Duke would supposedly lift the curse, but Owen vehemently warned them against it. That method absolutely wouldn't work. However, since the curse was imbued with dark magic, Kai confidently declared he could purify it. He strained with all his might, but it was no use. He thought it would be simpler than this. Josephine had reinforced the spell with the lives of others. The dark power was overwhelming. He couldn't fathom how many lives Josephine had sacrificed. He wanted to try again. He detected another peculiar aura. Though faint, it pulsed with a transcendental energy. Letitia said it was the dragon's power. It was likely a remnant from when the dragon resurrected him. While seemingly a good thing, Owen urged him to stay positive, but he couldn't shake his unease. The aura felt wrong. It resonated with a human frequency, yet possessed transcendental power. It felt less like a dragon's blessing and more like an undeveloped embryo. Could Lady Letitia be pregnant? It was said that the Duke was a descendant of dragons. He finally understood why he felt the dragon's power. This was undoubtedly good news. But could Lady Letitia bear it? Perhaps she would be happy for a while at first, but But if they couldn't find a way to lift the curse, he couldn't imagine how much pain Letitia would be in. So when Owen questioned him about his discovery, he chose to remain silent. Because even if his guess was correct, it would be better for Letitia to announce it herself. Owen looked like he was about to eat someone alive, but he also understood that he was too impatient. After all, there were only about 3 months left. But he was even more conflicted about something else. Lady Letitia had been reborn to save the Crown Prince. Should he tell the Crown Prince? Although Letitia had asked him to keep his secret, was that really the right thing to do? He kept thinking about the past life Letitia had spoken of. Back then, Noel had died at his hands. Even though it hadn't happened this time, he still felt a pang of fear. What if he still hadn't recognized his true master this time? What if Noel hadn't desperately persuaded him? Perhaps he and his beloved would have hurt each other again. He didn't want that to happen to Lady Letitia. And judging by the Crown Prince's behavior, he was deeply in love with Lady Letitia. Before coming to the Empire, he had insisted on coming along, despite the objections of his ministers. In the end, he had given him the communication stone, promising to report on Letitia's whereabouts every day. Only then had he been appeased. During the communication, Dietrian had learned about his wife's rebirth. He guessed that the dragon was behind it all, but because he was bound by the laws of the kingdom, C couldn't reveal everything he was doing. So he had to resort to this roundabout way. However, Dietrian understood the underlying meaning. If there was trouble, seek the dragon. But he hadn't expected to awaken himself. The night he met the dragon, Gil Lu had a dream. In a strange and bustling imperial banquet hall, he saw his brother, Julius. The true mastermind finally revealed himself. He poured something into the incense burner, dog urine. And with that, the emperor fell into a blissful state, no longer recognizing even his own daughter. Like mother, like son. The princess still believed that Lycalar was acting under Josephine's orders. He had wanted Lycalar to stay away from the emperor, but his father was already completely under control. What surprised him even more was that his attempt to switch the incense burner had been closely monitored through the black earring, the one his father had personally placed on him. He was somewhat grateful that he hadn't removed the earring. From what Lycalar had implied, removing it might cost him his life. Seeing his father deteriorate day by day, he was going mad. Because today was the day he was to meet Letitia. Yesterday, the emperor had written a letter requesting a meeting, but now he was in this dazed state. He had no choice but to go see Letitia alone. He kicked open the palace doors. Unexpectedly, Letitia was already waiting. He apologized for his lateness. Letitia handed him a tissue. He was dumbfounded. Written on the tissue were 3 large characters. Does the earring affect you? He couldn't help but blush, expressing his gratitude while hinting at the earring's treachery. Letitia successfully received the message. But what to do with the tissue? The only foolproof method he could think of was to eat it. But then Barnes solved the problem by simply burning it. He felt even more apologetic. After all, his father had stood her up. If it had been Josephine, she would have made a huge fuss. Yet, Letitia not only readily agreed to reschedule, but also invited him to show her around the capital. Unfortunately, it was a miserable, snowy day. Thankfully, Letitia seemed happy. They shared popsicles, then a warming hot pot. Finally, they ended up browsing a jewelry store. But in the next second, he was utterly dumbfounded. Letitia had actually bought a pair of black earrings, identical to the ones he wore. He'd never thought the earring issue could be resolved. Even Letitia wouldn't be able to manage it easily. Until he heard some news. His spirits immediately lifted. Letitia told him she had acquired another healing feather, Josephine's 4th wing, and its healing power was astonishing. Any ordinary wound, no matter how severe, could be healed instantly. Even severed limbs were no problem. No wonder Josephine had been so irritable lately. The prince finally felt a sense of relief. Accepting the earrings from Letitia, they bid each other farewell for the time being. Letitia's words still echoed in his ears. I've mastered the healing power, so I'm confident I can perfectly heal ordinary injuries. The meaning was clear. He was to cut off his earlobe with the earring attached. Just the thought of the method made him wince, but at least he had found a way, hadn't he? He felt like a fish on the beach that had finally found water. If only Letitia wasn't married. He would gladly relinquish his position as crown prince and have them married on the spot. But even if she were married, becoming in-laws wouldn't be so bad. He laughed heartily in the carriage. He even grumbled about Letitia's perceived disdain while she was by his side, calling her dull and unresponsive. Yet, as soon as he returned to the palace, Lycaler confronted him. "You must be very fond of the earrings he gave you." No one could believe it. The person who hadn't dared utter a word after being whipped by his mother for 18 years was now threatening the emperor with the destruction of the palace. The emperor trembled with rage, yet he smiled gently. This grand welcome for the true saintess, witnessed by the entire empire, had instantly transformed into a chaotic scene of jealousy and possessiveness. It turned out that after Letitia and the prince parted ways, her face had begun to pale. At first, they thought it was due to the curse, but then it was revealed she was with child. When Kai announced the news, the court physician nearly fainted from shock. He examined Letitia while silently praying. He didn't want to contradict the saintess's healing abilities. Fortunately, the outcome was joyous. Letitia was indeed pregnant, but the brief joy was followed by a cruel reality. What if the curse harmed the child? Consumed by fear, he was in no mood to share the good news. Ironically, it was his mother, the one who always made him cry, who finally soothed his tears. The wicked mother announced publicly that she would personally intervene to persuade her daughter, who had been bewitched by the evil dragon. This was Josephine's first appearance in days. He instantly perked up. After all, he now had something he must protect. He knew that weakness would only embolden his enemies. The emperor had mentioned in his letter that he would hold a debutante ball specifically for him. Brilliant fireworks illuminated the night sky. He made a grand entrance with Owen and Vanessa, but the atmosphere fell off as soon as they stepped inside. People whispered, unable to believe that a murderer had been chosen by the goddess. However, when they met Owen's murderous gaze, they quickly averted their eyes. But there were always those who couldn't resist stirring the pot. It was the Duke's greedy scheme. Holding a banquet for the king's wife was a grave insult. But before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly went silent. Letitia knew it was Owen's doing. No mortal could withstand such a murderous glare. Unexpectedly, Vanessa joined in, suggesting they burn the man to ashes. It was rare to see the two wings agree on anything. One wanted to set the fire, the other to fan the flames. Letitia was exasperated. Surely, this kind of talk wasn't good for the baby. Thankfully, everyone fell silent. The atmosphere wasn't as bad as he had imagined. He just needed an opportunity to gain public acceptance. And that opportunity arrived swiftly. The moment the emperor appeared, the nobles all bowed their heads. Only Letitia met his gaze. Irritation flickered across his face. "So, you're Josephine's daughter, Letitia. You must rarely have the opportunity to attend such events. I hope you're enjoying yourself." Both the tone and the underlying meaning dripped with animosity, devoid of the respect due a crown princess. Although she had anticipated a trap, a flicker of disappointment still pricked at her. The whispers started again, praising the emperor's wisdom and mocking her as an imposter. This was a blatant attempt to undermine her authority. And who else but Josephine could have conceived such a childish ploy? Letitia's mind raced. The emperor and Josephine had always had a strained relationship. He maintained a facade of respect, but underneath simmered a deep dislike. Yet now, he was openly siding with Josephine against her. Recalling the dark power emanating from the princess's earrings, Letitia had a suspicion. Her momentary silence tested the emperor's patience. "Crown Princess, are you not going to answer me?" But before responding, she needed to clarify something. "Your Majesty, what does your throne require? Besides territory, the support of the people and the palace, of course." She clicked forward in her heels, each step measured and deliberate. "How long do you think it would take me to destroy those things?" The venomous mother, her false identity exposed, was rattled. This welcome banquet, a spectacle for the entire empire, was meant to be Josephine's stage for a performance of maternal affection and manipulation. But her daughter's words had shattered the facade. Salus had already pledged his loyalty, but his allegiance was to the daughter Josephine loathed most. Still, her mission was accomplished. Letitia turned to leave, satisfied. She had hoped to gain the royal family's support peacefully. But the emperor was already under someone's control. In front of all the nobles, he began to berate her, utterly devoid of imperial dignity. The princess rushed to intervene, only to be struck and knocked unconscious. He even addressed the venomous Josephine as Holy Maiden. "You must have used the power of the evil dragon. You've deceived everyone with false power. His crazed demeanor was a chilling echo of Josephine. Letitia could only stare in disbelief. Was Prince Carl, who swore allegiance to me, also a fabrication? Yes, he's a fake too. The emperor had descended into a state of paranoid delusion. Suddenly, a crack echoed through the hall, and the ground began to tremble. Letitia unleashed the power of the earth. Reason had failed, so she would prove herself with force. Just moments ago, she had worried that Owen's penchant for violence wasn't conducive to a healthy pregnancy. Giant tree roots erupted from the ground behind her. Rise and experience my power for yourself, your majesty. See if it's real or fake. The emperor was instantly ensnared by the branches. He had also cruelly dismissed concerns for the unconscious princess. Your highness is unwell. Letitia advanced, only to be confronted by a group of foolish knights who drew their swords. They didn't even see what hit them before they were flung into the air, their bodies contorted in bizarre positions. The wind whipped around them, making it difficult to see, but Owen had barely lifted a finger. With him guarding her, Letitia could finally focus. She wasn't trying to harm the emperor, but to restore him to his senses. Observing the emperor's agitated state, his pale face and constricted pupils, she suspected drugs were involved. Has my mother been controlling you with drugs? The question struck a nerve. The previously arrogant emperor was suddenly consumed by fear. He didn't know why, but he knew he couldn't let this woman touch him. He desperately wanted to flee, but Letitia had already extended her hand. Just as she made contact, the branches imprisoning him were suddenly severed. Before she could react, the banquet hall filled with hordes of demonic creatures. She scanned the room. Just as she suspected, Kun, the one who controlled the monsters, had arrived, and Kun's presence heralded Josephine's imminent appearance. Oh my, Letitia, His Majesty treated you as an honored guest. What are you doing? Josephine donned her usual mask of feigned kindness. But no sooner had Letitia departed than Josephine couldn't keep up the act any longer. In a three-phase plan, Kun needed to confirm whether Letitia had actually touched the emperor. Kun was very confident. Letitia had only brushed against the emperor. Kun believed that wouldn't be enough to evolve her body, not even a single hair. Listening to the wind spirits relaying their conversation, Letitia smiled. This time, things probably wouldn't go as her mother planned. Although she had only touched the emperor fleetingly, that sliver of purifying power was enough. It would slowly grow within the emperor. He was dead, yet not entirely. Though cursed by her mother to die within 6 months, she was fortunate to have conceived a child. The thought of feeling the baby's movements come spring filled Letitia with an unconscious anticipation. But could she truly protect her child? What if the curse couldn't be broken? Fear and helplessness washed over her. She was terrified. Perhaps it was the pregnancy hormones, but all the emotion she had kept bottled up came pouring out. She felt like a reed swaying in the wind, powerless against the gale. She needed strength. She needed Dicterion. Her tears dripped, each one resonating within Caillou. The winged creature's emotions mirrored those of its master. Caillou was in turmoil, but knew with certainty that Dicterion had to be brought here. No sooner had they stepped outside than Noel and the others rushed towards them. They could sense Letitia's pain, and they sensed Caillou was hiding something. But Caillou couldn't reveal the good news of the pregnancy. He had promised Letitia to keep it a secret for now. And even the wings, not currently with Letitia, could feel her pain. This meant bringing Dicterion here was even more urgent. All the wings, even those not currently with Letitia, could feel her pain. This meant bringing Dicterion was no longer a matter of choice, but necessity. Just as Caillou voiced this thought, they received startling news. Dicterion had arrived in the imperial capital 3 days prior, using the 3 scrolls Owen had given him. But he hadn't come to see Letitia. He had come to meet Prince Carl, whom he had never met before. Today, before the imperial palace's welcome banquet had even concluded, Dicterion took a carriage to a haunted alley. If it hadn't been for a sackful of gold, the coachman likely wouldn't have dared the journey. Ever since the night he saw the dragon, he'd been having a dream. In the dream, the imperial banquet hall was where it all began. It was also where his brother, Urios, first went to guard the tomb. And on the night of the banquet, Urios had his first prophetic dream. But how could a saint dare kill a prince of the empire? Urios clearly didn't believe it, not until the saint's dream of Dicterion going to the Empire became reality. Only then did Urios understand, and he went to the Empire in Urios's place, even meeting Letitia as a child. Dicterion also saw how his brother died, and how Letitia's spirit was broken because of it. No matter how the time and scenes changed, Letitia was never happy. No one treated her like a human being, day after day, year after year. Even after marrying him, she was tormented daily. Dicterion had thought that his death would save Letitia, but it hadn't changed anything. 3 years later, Letitia died. She died in a small, dark room where even rats wouldn't live. And in her final moments, the one she longed for was him, Dicterion. Gilliard showed him the past. He was shocked, but had no time for grief, because he also saw the future, and it showed him what he needed to do. Fortunately, Letitia had been reborn. He opened the dilapidated door, but the interior was resplendent. It was Carl's illusion magic, but he was preoccupied with finding a way to break the curse. If it weren't for Owen, he probably wouldn't have come to see the prince. His impatience and lack of courtesy were evident. Dietrian understood. After all, the curse would be lifted if he were killed. But there was no time for explanations. Your Highness, for the sake of my wife, Letitia, I implore you, go to the Imperial Palace immediately. Save the Sixth Wing. In his final moments, he finally learned the whole truth. Josephine's spinsterhood had all been a lie, and the one manipulating everything was Josephine's son. When the princess awoke from her unconsciousness, she noticed the emperor's complexion had improved. Her father was finally free from the drug's control. Letitia's healing powers were truly remarkable. Overjoyed, she instructed the physician to look after the emperor and hurried to find Letitia so they could talk. She needed to remove the listening device Lycoler had placed in her ear. But just as she stepped out the door, she ran into Josephine. She remembered seeing him at the banquet yesterday. What was he doing in front of the emperor's bedroom? A wave of unease washed over her. She tried to turn back and call for help, but the corridor was eerily silent. She feigned composure and tried to engage him in conversation, but it was no use. A cloth covered her mouth and nose, and she collapsed, her body going limp. When she regained consciousness, Lycoler stood before her. No matter how she cursed him, he simply smiled serenely. She had planned to endure until the day of victory, but now there was no need. She wouldn't live to see tomorrow. You intend to kill me, don't you? She asked, getting straight to the point. Lycoler didn't even bother to deny it. He had brought her here for that very purpose. But what surprised her even more was that Josephine, who she had assumed was in charge, now deferred to Lycoler. Josephine even addressed Lycoler with a subservient tone. The knights outside had been dismissed. Didn't he suffer the pain of a broken oath? Watching the two interact, the princess finally understood. Lycoler was the mastermind her brother had spoken of. He had been helping Josephine commit murder all along. He had helped Josephine escape with a divine power. Facing such a person, she knew she had no chance of survival. She might as well try to glean some information. Even if she died, Carl would eventually uncover the truth. She turned to Lycoler, demanding, "Do you intend to kill me and the Emperor and seize control of the Empire?" She was only half right. Lycoler laughed. Controlling the Empire was merely a stepping stone, not the ultimate goal. Since the Empire's founding, there have been 9 greater wings. 9 rings, symbolizing their souls, have always protected this land, and they have always been kept by the imperial family. He reached for the dull gemstone in the princess's possession. Although it had lost its light, the princess believed it could one day be restored. She was still contemplating how to protect it when she heard a sharp crack. Lycoler had crushed the gemstone in his hand. She was shocked and horrified. Lycoler, as if mimicking her despair, casually raised his hand. 4 other dull gemstones appeared above him, hovering in the air. But in the next instant, they vanished into dust. She had been clinging to the hope that Letitia could restore them. "My apologies for shattering your hopes," Lycoler said, stepping closer. He then delivered an even more devastating blow. "Those gemstones have been permanently extinguished. 5 of the 9 wings, their souls are gone, with no hope of rebirth. Letitia can't restore them. If not for Siegmund's interference, the 6th wing would have been completely extinguished as well. But it doesn't matter. The wings will all be eliminated eventually. And you, princess, are the beginning of the slaughter." Lycoler tightened his grip on her throat. He would sacrifice her to the ancient law, granting Josephine the power to unleash the curse. "Come now, let us bring forth Letitia's curse." The princess finally understood everything. No wonder Carl, having discovered Josephine's true nature, had been enduring the pain of a broken oath. Just like Yvonne and Letitia, their secrets had been stolen through murder. If Letitia were to kill him, the fate he'd fought so hard to reclaim would be shattered once more. He struggled, gasping, "No, don't touch the crown princess." But his pleas were in vain. Lycaler, though momentarily angered, was now utterly lifeless. His body was discarded in the frigid expanse of the palace square. The figure who cast him aside was a red-haired knight.